Tonight, we step into the misty glow of gaslit London, a city that was once the beating heart of an empire. And yet, at its quietest hours, it belonged to the simplest of moments. Imagine yourself drifting down cobblestone lanes as the world is still half asleep, the air heavy with the cool breath of morning fog, and the faint scent of coal smoke curling from the chimneys above. In this dreamlike haze, the city begins to stir. And so begins our gentle journey through daily life in Victorian London. Before we set off fully, let me whisper a little invitation as you listen. And as you drift further into rest, perhaps you'll let your thoughts wander too. Down below, in the comments, you can share with me which corners of history you'd most like to explore next. This channel is our quiet reading room, and your thoughts guide the shelves we open together down now. Picture the city as the first pale threads of daylight creep over the rooftops. It is not yet noisy or hurried. There is only the faint clip-clop of a lone carriage wheel echoing against stone walls, the shuffle of a milkman balancing his cans, and the soft call of a newspaper boy rehearsing his headlines before the bustle of the day. The lamplighters, who had walked the streets with their long poles the night before, are finishing their rounds, extinguishing one gaslight after another until the glow fades into morning grey. You may feel the dampness of the air as it clings to shawls and coats. London mornings carried a peculiar chill, even in summer. A mix of river mist from the Thames and the lingering haze of smoke from coal fires. For some, this chill meant hardship, the ragged child curled beneath a doorway, or the washerwoman already at her bucket, sleeves rolled, hands red with cold water. Yet for many others, it was simply part of the rhythm of life, to rise, to stretch, to breathe in the scent of the waking city, and to begin the day. The city in these early hours was not the London of grandeur you may imagine from novels and paintings, but something gentler, softer. A dustman's cart rattled by, collecting the ashes from hearths. The cries of street vendors began slowly, like sparrows finding their morning voice. And in kitchens across the city, kettles hissed to life, promising warm tea to cut through the damp. Tea was not merely a drink, but a comfort, a ritual that bound together the start of countless mornings, whether poured into a fine porcelain cup in a townhouse drawing room, or into a simple chipped mug in a modest brick cottage, as you drift here with me. You may wonder, what did ordinary Londoners see when they first stepped outside? They would have noticed narrow lanes and winding alleys, the cobbles uneven beneath their boots, sometimes slick with rain or horse manure. They would have seen shop shutters creaking open, the flicker of a baker's oven glowing through a street-level window, or a butcher sweeping sawdust across the threshold. The smells were never absent. Freshly baked bread mixing with damp hay, the pungency of tanneries, or the sweetness of oranges displayed on a vendor's cart. And if you walked a little further, you would find the Thames itself broad and endlessly busy. Barges moved slowly in the current, ferries crossed with labourers and goods, and in the early mist you might see the tall masts of ships docked at port, their sails furled like sleeping wings. The river gave London its life and its rhythm, carrying coal, timber, food, and fabrics into the heart of the city, and carrying dreams outward, to distant colonies and markets. But let us pause, and not hurry, because tonight we are not tourists rushing through history, but dreamers walking slowly, hand in hand with the past. So imagine the rhythm of footsteps on stone, one after another, as we follow the quiet path of a maid sent out to fetch bread, her basket swinging gently at her side. She nods to the crossing sweeper, a boy with a broom who earns his pennies by keeping the street corners clear of muck. She may glance at the gentlemen striding quickly toward the station, their top hats bobbing above the crowd. And all around, London is waking, not suddenly, but as though the city itself yawns and stretches into the light. In a moment, we'll step closer to the homes themselves, to peek inside the lives of London's families, from the grand townhouses with their polished brass knockers, to the cramped tenements where space was scarce and privacy scarcer still. But for now, let's linger on this street, where the day's promises are only beginning. If you listen closely, you may hear the bell of a nearby church ringing the hour. The churches of London, whether grand cathedrals or humble chapels, kept time for the city. Their bells were as familiar as the sound of footsteps. A rhythm that reminded everyone, baker, banker, beggar alike, that the hours belonged to them, to work, to prayer, to meals, and to rest. This morning hour held a kind of peace that would vanish once the city was fully awake. Soon the great roads would thunder with traffic, omnibuses pulled by horses, carriages rushing, carts laden with goods, and pedestrians filling the pavements. The air would grow thick with sound and soot, but here, at dawn, there was still quiet, a quiet that allowed the imagination to wander, and perhaps allowed those who lived through it to dream. Just for a little while, before the clamour began. Now, as we prepare to leave this gentle morning behind, let's take one more look at the figures that pass us by. A schoolboy with a satchel, his face scrubbed pink, eyes still heavy with sleep. A postman in his uniform, letters neatly bundled at his side. A woman in a shawl, carrying a child who stirs restlessly against her shoulder. Each one with their own destination, their own little story woven into the larger fabric of Victorian London. And so we drift slowly to the next part of our journey. In the following chapter, we'll step indoors, into the warmth of homes both modest and grand, to see what breakfast meant, what comforts and routines began the day, and how the domestic world shaped the rhythm of Victorian life. For now, though, let this misty dawn remain with you, soft, hushed, and endlessly gentle, like the closing of your eyes, now. As you drift further into sleep, know that the story continues, waiting for you in the next quiet hour. If the streets of London in the morning carried the cool hush of mist and footsteps, then stepping indoors revealed a different kind of rhythm, one of warmth, scent, and routine. Tonight, let us slip quietly through the doors of Victorian homes, wandering from the grandest of drawing rooms to the simplest of kitchens, to see how families began their day in this remarkable age. Imagine first a townhouse in one of London's quieter squares, its brick facade, proud but softened by ivy and time. A polished brass knocker gleams faintly in the morning light, and beyond the threshold lies a hallway lined with patterned wallpaper and neat, orderly furniture. In such homes, the household was already stirring long before the family descended the staircase. Servants had risen early, lighting fires in the hearths so that rooms would be warm by the time their masters awoke. The scent of coal mingled with the faint sweetness of toast browning in the kitchen below. Breakfast here might be laid on a long dining table, with dishes of eggs, bacon, and bread, accompanied by steaming pots of tea or coffee. Yet in many households, there was also a quiet formality, a sense that meals were not only for nourishment, but for order, a moment when the family gathered, spoke politely, and prepared themselves for the day's duties. The father, perhaps, would glance at the morning paper, the rustle of its pages mingling with the clink of silverware. The mother might pour tea with steady grace, while children whispered to one another, eager or anxious about the school day ahead. But let us wander now from this genteel home to one far humbler, in a narrow lane where houses pressed close together, their windows fogged from the damp. Here, a single room might serve as kitchen, dining space, and gathering place for the whole family. The fire was not always guaranteed. Coal was precious, and wood scarce, but when a few flames did burn, they were used carefully, both to warm the air and to heat a kettle. Breakfast might be simple porridge, bread spread thinly with dripping, or, for those lucky enough, a rasher of bacon shared among many. The sound of spoons against bowls, the chatter of children, and the steady rhythm of the day's first chores filled the air, in both rich and poor households alike. Tea was the constant companion, strong and dark, with milk to soften its edge. It was as much a comfort as a necessity. For those with little, it provided warmth when food was scarce. For those with plenty, it was part of a ritual that framed the day. And always, the steam curling from a teacup seemed to bring with it a moment of pause, a moment to breathe before the city called. You may picture the small details that shaped these interiors. In wealthy homes, heavy drapes softened the light. Polished mahogany glowed in the firelight, and gilt-framed mirrors reflected the flicker of candles and lamps. Carpets muffled footsteps, and the ticking of a clock echoed gently through the hall. In modest dwellings, furniture was plainer and often worn, the chairs mended many times, the table marked by years of use. Yet even here there were touches of care, a china teapot treasured for its durability, a shelf lined with family keepsakes, or a curtain stitched from old fabric to give a little privacy. Beyond breakfast, the day unfurled according to station and means. The gentleman of the house, if prosperous, might set off toward the city, their boots polished, papers in hand, bound for offices and counting houses. Ladies, depending on their circle, might spend the morning overseeing the household, writing letters, or paying visits to friends and relatives. Children from wealthier families often had tutors or schools to attend, while those from poorer homes might already be at work, selling flowers, sweeping crossings, or carrying water. And yet, even among all these differences, there was a shared thread. Each family, each household, shaped its morning with small acts of preparation, setting the tone for the hours to come. In a moment, we will peek into the hidden world of servants, whose hands and hours made so much of this order possible. But before we do, let's linger a little on the role of the home itself. For Victorians, home was not just a shelter, but a moral space, a place meant to reflect values of respectability, order, and comfort. Advice, books, and magazines of the era often reminded readers that a tidy home suggested a tidy life, that even the smallest dwelling could embody dignity if kept clean and well cared for. This idea, sometimes comforting, sometimes burdensome, shaped how people swept their steps, arranged their furniture, and greeted visitors at the door. And so, within these walls, whether grand or humble, the rituals of daily life unfolded like clockwork. The flicker of a fire, the aroma of food, the low murmur of conversation, all of it formed the gentle heartbeat of London mornings. Now, let us open another door, one that leads below stairs or into narrow alleys where servants' entrances stood. Here we discover the lives of those who rose before dawn, whose labor kept the wheels of the city turning. In wealthier households, maids polished grates, scrubbed floors, and carried water up countless flights of stairs. The cook tended her pots with practiced care, and the butler oversaw the order of the pantry. Life was demanding, Yet within their shared work there were bonds of companionship, moments of laughter whispered in the scullery, and small joys found in the rhythm of familiar tasks. In smaller homes, where no servants could be afforded, the work still had to be done. Mothers and daughters scrubbed steps, beat carpets, and fetched coal, while fathers and sons carried heavy buckets of water from public pumps. The effort was constant and often unseen, yet it held families together and gave structure to the passing days. And so, as the morning deepened into midday, the city outside grew louder, more crowded, more hurried. But here, inside these rooms, the pace of life was measured by smaller things. A kettle boiling, a broom sweeping, a letter folded and sealed. As you drift with me through this chapter, let yourself imagine the gentle rhythm of these homes, the quiet pride of keeping a hearth, the clink of cups, the steady hum of daily chores. It was within these spaces that lives were shaped, where love and duty and hardship mingled together, forming the fabric of Victorian London, not in grand gestures, but in the soft repetition of everyday acts. In our next part, we will step beyond the thresholds once more, into the bustling markets and shops of the city, where colours, scents, and voices filled the air, and where London's people met the world through trade and exchange. For now, let your eyes grow heavy and rest in the warmth of these hearths, the softness of these mornings, and the quiet comfort of home. Now, as you drift further into sleep, know that the city continues outside your window, waiting for us to explore its lively streets in the next gentle hour. Now that we have wandered through the quiet dawn and stepped softly inside the homes of Victorian London, let us drift back outdoors, where the city begins to hum with life. For tonight, we will find ourselves among the markets, the shops, and the street vendors, where colour and noise and fragrance weave together into a tapestry of daily commerce. Picture yourself emerging from a narrow lane into one of the great markets of the city. The mist has lifted, the gas lamps have been extinguished, and the air carries the mingled scents of fresh bread, fruit, fish, and damp straw underfoot. There is no rush in our step. We move slowly, letting our eyes wander over the stalls, our ears attuned to the sing-song calls of the vendors, each one vying for attention with their wares. Apples, rosy and sweet. One cries, "Fresh mackerel, caught this morning," calls another. Their voices blend like the notes of a busy chorus, rising and falling with the rhythm of trade. Covent Garden, with its grand covered arcades, was famed for flowers and produce, a place where early mornings were alive with the fragrance of roses and violets, mingling with earthy carrots and crisp cabbages laid out in baskets. The flower girls, with their shawls wrapped against the chill, carried blooms in wicker trays, their fingers red from the cold, their voices bright as they offered posies to passing gentlemen and ladies. Imagine pausing here, inhaling the sweet, damp scent of petals, and hearing the faint rustle as stems are gathered and tied with ribbon. Further east, Billingsgate Market rang with the cries of fishmongers, the slap of fish on wooden slabs, and the constant bargaining of buyers. It was noisy, crowded, and pungent, the very air alive with salt, scales, and the smell of the river. Yet even here, there was rhythm and order, the careful weighing of cod, the stacking of oysters, the splash of water to keep the catch fresh. Men in heavy aprons moved with practiced ease, their hands quick and their voices strong. For those who strolled by, the scene could seem overwhelming, but if you let yourself linger, you would see the beauty in its energy, the teamwork, the trust, the dance of hands exchanging coins and goods. not far away. The markets of Smithfield bustled with another kind of trade. Here, cattle, sheep, and pigs were brought in by drovers, their hooves clattering on the stones, their bleats and lowing filling the air. For centuries, Smithfield had been the beating heart of London's meat trade, and though the animals were destined for butchers' blocks, the market itself carried a sense of tradition, of a city sustained by the labours of those who rose before dawn. To walk past Smithfield was to glimpse both the hardship and the necessity of feeding a growing metropolis. Yet even here, among the noise, you might catch the sight of a child leading a smaller animal with care, or a farmer pausing to share a bite of bread with a fellow trader. Moments of humanity amid the bustle. But markets were not only places of necessity, they were also spaces of wonder. In the lanes around Petticoat Lane, hawkers displayed bolts of fabric, ribbons, lace, and clothing of every sort. Shoppers pressed close, fingering the cloth, haggling over prices, and admiring the vibrant displays. The market was alive with laughter and chatter, a place where neighbours met, where bargains were struck, and where the simple act of buying a scarf or a coat became part of the social fabric of the city. Street vendors filled every gap between markets, their cries a constant companion to the pedestrian. A muffin man with a bell slung over his arm offered warm treats on cold mornings. A seller of hot chestnuts kept his coals glowing through the afternoon, and children carrying baskets of watercress moved through the alleys, their small voices echoing fresh watercress, a bunch for a penny. These sounds were so familiar to Londoners that they became the very soundtrack of the city. For the wealthy, they were background noise. For the poor, they were survival, each cry a chance for a coin. Shops, too, added their own character to the streets. The grand department stores, like Whiteley's or Swan and Edgar, gleamed with polished glass and orderly displays, inviting middle-class families to step inside and marvel at the abundance of goods. Here, one could buy clothing, linens, even furniture, all under a single roof, a new and modern idea at the time. Smaller shops lined every neighborhood, bakers with their loaves still warm, grocers with barrels of flour and sugar, apothecaries with rows of mysterious bottles. Each had its own rhythm, its own scent, its own gentle presence in the life of a street. As you wander slowly through this world, imagine the colors of it all. The deep orange of carrots piled high, the silvery sheen of fish, the bright crimson of ribbons fluttering in the breeze, the soft whites and browns of loaves stacked in windows. Imagine the sounds, coins clinking, horses shifting their hooves, children laughing as they dart between stalls, and above all, imagine the sense of movement, the steady flow of people, each with their baskets, their errands, their small part in the great, pulsing life of London. And yet, there was always room for pause. A man might stop to sip coffee from a street stand. A woman might pause to greet a neighbor, their conversation drifting like a lull between the shouts of traders. Even amid the busiest of markets, life carried its softer moments. Those little fragments of connection that made the noise feel less like chaos and more like a kind of music in a moment. We will step further into the afternoon to see how Londoners passed their leisure hours, the parks, the gardens, the quiet strolls and the public entertainments that offered respite from work. But before we leave the markets behind, let us take one last look at the vendors, their baskets emptying as the day grows older, their cries softening as their energy wanes. For them, the market was not simply a place of business, it was life itself. a space where every day brought new challenges and new hopes. So, as the sun rises higher, casting golden light across the stalls, we drift away slowly, carrying with us the scent of fresh bread, the chatter of voices, and the gentle hum of commerce that kept Victorian London alive. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the markets fade into the distance, their bustle replaced by the softer promise of the city's parks and promenades waiting for us in the next chapter. After the bustle of markets and the cries of street vendors, London offered another face, one softer and more serene, as the sun climbed toward its highest point, and the clamour of trade gave way to the steady hum of midday. The city's parks and promenades opened themselves like vast green lungs, breathing calm into the heart of the metropolis. Tonight, let us wander there together, where gravel paths wound gently between trees, and the pace of life slowed to a stroll. Picture Hyde Park, that great expanse of green in the very centre of the city. Imagine the wide avenues lined with elm trees, their leaves whispering faintly in the breeze, and the sound of carriage wheels crunching softly on the gravel. The Serpentine, a long, glimmering lake, lay like a mirror beneath the sky, reflecting clouds that drifted lazily as if time itself had slowed. Families walked arm in arm, ladies in flowing dresses shaded by parasols, gentlemen in tall hats tipping them politely as acquaintances passed. The park was a stage of sorts, where society, both high and modest, displayed itself in gentle procession. In one corner, children might be seen tossing crumbs to the ducks, their laughter carrying on the wind. Nearby, nannies pushed prams with steady rhythm, their charges bundled in lace and wool. And at certain hours, the famous Rotten Row, that broad riding path, came alive with equestrians. Horses trotted elegantly, their riders sitting tall, a sight admired by all who gathered to watch. To stroll in Hyde Park was not merely a matter of leisure, but of belonging, of placing oneself within the great tide of London life. But Hyde Park was not alone. Kensington Gardens offered shaded walks and quiet lawns, where one might find a bench to rest and read. Regent's Park, with its winding paths and ornamental flower beds, was a favourite for families, and in its corner, the zoological gardens provided delights that seemed almost magical. Imagine a child pressing their face to the bars of a cage, eyes wide with wonder at the sight of an elephant, or a parrot calling brightly from its perch. For many Londoners, such sights were extraordinary, a glimpse of a wider world beyond the familiar streets. Leisure, however, was not only for the wealthy. Working people, too, found moments of respite in the city's open spaces. On a Sunday afternoon, after church and the week's labours, families might stroll along Victoria Park in the East End, enjoying the fresh air and the freedom from cramped tenement rooms. Their music sometimes floated from a bandstand, the notes drifting gently across the lawns, while children rolled hoops or chased one another across the grass, though their clothing was plainer and their pace more practical. The joy was no less deep, for parks offered a rare gift, a space of open sky and air, free for all, beyond the parks. Promenades along the Thames drew their own crowds. Picture the Embankment, newly built in the mid-century, with its broad walkways lined by lamps and trees. Gentlemen strolled with canes, couples paused to gaze at the water, and street performers sometimes entertained with music or acrobatics. The river itself shimmered in the sunlight, ferries gliding steadily, barges creaking under their loads, while the great bridges rose above like gateways to other worlds. To walk by the Thames was to feel part of the pulse of the city, to breathe with it, to watch it flow endlessly onward. As the afternoon stretched onward, leisure also took quieter forms indoors. Parlors in middle-class homes became gathering spaces where the piano might be opened, and a daughter played a gentle tune while family and friends listened. Needlework was brought out, letters were written, and conversations drifted between the trivial and the tender. The fire burned low, the light softened through lace curtains, and time seemed to linger in these small rituals of comfort. For the poorer families of London, leisure often meant simpler pleasures: a game played in the street, a shared story told aloud, or the joy of walking together to see the sights of the city. Even a penny could buy entry to a pleasure garden or a cheap theatre. Wherefore, a brief hour or two, laughter and music carried troubles away. These small respites were cherished, for they gave light to lives that could otherwise be weighed down by work and hardship. You may notice, as we drift through these scenes, how much emphasis Victorians placed on the idea of respectability, even in leisure. To stroll, to read, to play music, to walk in the park. All these were seen not only as pleasures, but as moral acts, ways of cultivating self and family. Leisure was not idleness, but a chance to grow, to display refinement, to belong to the great narrative of the city. And so, whether one was rich or poor, leisure hours carried meaning far beyond simple rest. In a moment, we will step into the world of evening, the glow of gas lamps, the laughter spilling from theatres, the quiet hush of parlours preparing for night. But for now, let us linger on these afternoon hours, where the air is warm, the light is golden, and the city moves at a gentle pace. Imagine yourself walking slowly beneath the trees, your steps unhurried, the voices of others drifting past like soft music. You pause to watch the sun ripple on the Serpentine, or to breathe the fragrance of a rose garden, and in that pause, you feel the calm of the city at rest. The day is not over, yet it has softened. The markets are behind us, the evening not yet begun. Here, in this suspended hour, London is both vast and intimate, filled with strangers and yet filled with a sense of belonging. And so, as you drift with me through this quiet leisure, let your mind rest on the softness of lawns, the hush of gravel paths, the gentle laughter of children playing in the distance. All these things remain with us as we prepare to move forward, toward the shimmering nights of Victorian London, where the city glowed beneath its lamps, and where stories unfolded in theatres, music halls, and dimly lit streets. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the calm of these gardens linger with you, soft and green, a resting place between the bustle of morning and the glow of evening yet to come. As the sun sank behind the rooftops of Victorian London, the city did not grow quiet, it simply transformed. The pale glow of day gave way to a softer, golden shimmer, as gas lamps flickered to life one by one, stretching in endless lines along the streets. Tonight, let us wander gently through these twilight hours, where carriages rattled past glowing shop fronts, where theatres filled with laughter and applause, and where the night held its own kind of charm. Imagine standing at the corner of a busy thoroughfare, just as the lamps are lit. The lamplighter moves steadily from post to post, his long pole tipped with flame, touching each glass globe until it blooms with light. One by one, the streets glow, their reflections shimmering in damp cobblestones. The air carries a faint tint of coal smoke, mixed with the sweeter scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's brazier. It is a moment of transformation, as if the city draws a curtain across its daytime face and reveals a new one, softened yet alive. Shops remained open into the evening, their windows glowing with warm light, displaying hats, gloves, books, and trinkets to tempt passers-by. Crowds strolled past, pausing to gaze at the wares, their faces lit by the lamplight. Street musicians played violins or barrel organs, their tunes weaving gently through the murmur of voices. A flower girl might offer a small posy, her basket fragrant with violets, while nearby a muffin man rang his bell, announcing warm treats to ward off the chill. For those who sought entertainment, London's theatres were dazzling beacons. The West End drew audiences in their finest attire, ladies in silk gowns, gentlemen in polished shoes and gleaming hats. Inside, the gaslit chandeliers sparkled above velvet seats, and the air hummed with anticipation. Plays ranged from grand Shakespearean performances to light comedies and melodramas. The moment the curtain rose, a hush would fall, broken only by the actors' voices echoing across the stage. For a few hours, the troubles of the city melted away, replaced by stories of love, laughter, or tragedy. Not far from the theatres, music halls thrived, offering a livelier, more boisterous kind of entertainment. Here, audiences sang along to popular tunes, clapped in rhythm to comic songs, and roared with laughter at performers' jokes. The music hall was a place of togetherness, where clerks, labourers, and shopgirls mingled freely, sharing in the joy of escape. The smell of beer and tobacco hung in the air, but so did the sound of hearty cheer, a chorus of voices rising in unison. For many, these halls were the beating heart of evening life, where community was found in song. But evenings in London were not only about performance. Parks and promenades, though quieter, still welcomed those who wished to stroll beneath the lamplight. Along the embankment, couples paused to gaze at the dark waters of the Thames, the reflections of lamps dancing like stars upon the surface. Gentle breezes carried the distant sound of bells from churches, mingling with the occasional whistle of a night watchman or the soft rumble of a passing carriage. It was a city alive, yet never hurried in these twilight hours. For families, evenings often unfolded in the quiet comfort of home. In middle-class parlours, lamps or candles were lit, casting a golden glow across patterned wallpaper and polished tables. A fire crackled softly, warming the room, while the family gathered. The father might read aloud from the newspaper or a favoured novel, his voice steady and calm. The mother, perhaps, mended clothes or guided a child through homework. A daughter played the piano, filling the air with gentle notes, while siblings whispered or giggled in corners. These evenings were not grand, but they were intimate, weaving threads of comfort that held families close in humbler homes. Where space and light were scarce, evenings were still precious. A single candle might glow on a small table, while children played simple games or listened to stories told aloud. Neighbours sometimes gathered together, sharing laughter, sharing food when possible, sharing warmth in more ways than one. Though poverty shadowed many such homes, these hours of connection offered a kind of richness that cannot be measured in coins. As the night deepened, the streets took on a quieter mood. The shouts of vendors faded, the music of barrel organs fell silent, and only the steady clip-clop of horses and the call of a watchman marked the hours. Fog sometimes rolled in from the river, blurring the lamps into halos of light, softening the outlines of buildings until the city seemed dreamlike, suspended between waking and sleep. For those who wandered late, London by night was both mysterious and enchanting, a place of secrets and stillness. In a moment, we will step into the hidden world of late-night London, where work continued unseen, the printers setting type for the morning paper, the bakers kneading dough by lantern light, the policemen pacing their beats. But before we move onward, let us pause here, in the glow of the evening, and simply breathe in the atmosphere. The faint hum of conversation, the warmth of lamps, the distant strains of music, all of it blending into a lullaby that soothed the restless city. For now, let yourself imagine walking slowly beneath the gaslight, your steps unhurried, your breath visible in the cool air. Perhaps you pause at a shop window or linger to listen to a street musician's final song. Perhaps you find yourself in the comfort of a parlor, the fire crackling, voices gentle, the day slipping quietly into night. And so, as the city settles, so too may you. The gaslight glimmers softly, the streets grow calm, and the world of Victorian evenings folds itself into memory. In our next part, we will slip behind the scenes into those hours when most were sleeping, to see how the city kept moving in the dark, preparing itself for another dawn. But for now, rest in the glow of this evening, and let the calm carry you deeper into dreams. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the gaslight fade slowly, like stars dimming at dawn, leaving only the warmth of stillness within you. While much of Victorian London drifted into slumber, the city itself never truly slept. Behind closed shutters and beneath the glow of the gas lamps, countless hands kept working, sustaining the rhythm of life so that morning might arrive fully prepared. Tonight, let us wander gently among these unseen figures, the bakers, the printers, the watchmen, and others who moved quietly through the hours of darkness. Imagine the narrow lanes of the city at midnight, hushed but not silent. The clip of hooves was rarer now, yet an occasional carriage still rattled past, carrying late theatre-goers or a doctor summoned on urgent business. Fog sometimes curled low along the cobblestones, muting every sound, so that even the footsteps of a single man seemed amplified in the stillness. But if you listened closely, you would hear the faint hum of activity, the turning of a wheel, the clatter of trays, the shuffle of boots, all signs that London's night workers were at their posts. The bakers began their labor long before dawn. In small, warm shops tucked into side streets, fires glowed steadily in ovens, casting flickering light upon flour-dusted walls. Men worked with practiced hands, kneading dough, shaping loaves, and sliding them into the heat. The air was thick with the scent of yeast, comforting and steady, a promise of sustenance yet to come. Imagine walking past such a bakery in the still hours of night, catching a whiff of warm bread carried on the chill air, a reminder that even in darkness, life was quietly being prepared. By the time the city awoke, baskets would be filled, trays would be stacked, and shop windows would gleam with golden loaves, ready to greet the morning. Elsewhere, the printing presses thundered, hidden away in workshops that never truly closed. Printers worked by lamplight, their faces smudged with ink, their hands steady as they set type, letter by letter, to form the words of the day's news. The presses groaned and whirred, filling the night with their steady rhythm. Pages emerged, hot and damp, carrying reports of Parliament, trade, and distant wars. By dawn, newspaper boys would be ready to scatter across the streets, shouting headlines as Londoners stepped outside. Yet all of it, the knowledge, the stories, the shared sense of a world beyond, began here, in the quiet persistence of night labor. On the streets themselves, watchmen and policemen patrolled, their lanterns glowing faintly as they walked their beats. Cloaked against the cold, they moved at steady pace, watching doorways, listening for trouble, ensuring that order was kept while others slept. Their whistles and truncheons were rarely used, but their presence offered a kind of reassurance that the city, vast as it was not entirely unguarded. Imagine hearing the soft crunch of their boots approaching, the brief exchange of words as they greeted one another, the lantern's glow vanishing slowly as they passed by into the fog. There were others, too, whose work carried on unseen. Night soil men emptied cesspits, their labor unpleasant but vital, keeping the city from drowning in its own waste. They worked quietly, often under cover of darkness, their carts moving slowly through back lanes. It was not a task spoken of often, yet without them, the health of the city would have faltered. Their work, though humble, was part of the hidden backbone of London. Market porters also began their day long before dawn, hauling crates of vegetables, sacks of flour, barrels of fish, and sides of meat into the markets. By the time the first buyers arrived, everything would be in place, neatly arranged, ready to be sold. To see them at their work in the dim hours was to witness a kind of choreography. Men moving swiftly, shoulders bent under heavy loads, voices low but steady, their breath clouding in the cold air. And then there were the drivers of night coaches and cabs, waiting patiently for late travelers, their horses stamping in the cold. They knew the city's streets in darkness as well as by day, guiding passengers home through the fog. Sometimes their only company was the sound of hooves and the faint jingling of harnesses. Yet their vigilance never wavered, for safety and speed were their livelihood. In all these labors, there was a kind of quiet dignity. The city might not have noticed them by day, but at night, these workers were the heartbeat that kept everything alive. Their efforts ensured that the bread was fresh, the news was ready, the streets were safe, and the markets were full. Without them, the smooth rhythm of London mornings could not have existed, and yet, beyond the toil, there were also moments of stillness. A baker might pause, wiping his brow, and listen to the faint song of a bird heralding dawn. A printer might step outside for a breath of cold air, looking up at the stars just visible through the fog. A watchman might pause on a bridge, leaning on his lantern, watching the river flow silently in the darkness. Even in labor, there was space for reflection, for a fleeting sense of peace. In a moment, we will follow the city into morning once again, watching how all this unseen work blossoms into the life of a new day. But before we leave the night behind, let us pause and honor those figures who moved quietly through the shadows. Their names may not be remembered, but their presence shaped the rhythm of London, unseen yet essential. Like the steady breath of someone sleeping peacefully in the dark, so as you rest, imagine the glow of a bakery's oven, the hum of a press, the faint bobbing of a lantern down a foggy street. These are the sounds and sights of London's night, not loud, not hurried, but steady, comforting. Alive now, as you drift further into sleep. Let the calm of these hidden workers carry you into dreams, knowing that while you rest, the city too is being gently prepared for another day. As dawn returned once more to Victorian London, the quiet labors of the night folded seamlessly into the wider rhythm of the day. For a city of millions, work was the great pulse that carried each hour forward, shaping lives with its steady beat. Tonight, let us wander slowly through that world of labor, from the clerks seated neatly at their desks, to the shopkeepers standing behind counters, to the craftsmen and laborers whose hands built and repaired the fabric of daily life. Imagine first the narrow streets leading into the city of London, where the offices of merchants, bankers, and shipping firms lined the thoroughfares. As the clock struck 9, clerks began to file in, their boots polished, their hats brushed, their ledgers tucked neatly under their arms. They were young men, often in their teens or 20s, dressed in dark coats and stiff collars, each striving to build a future from careful numbers and tidy handwriting. Inside, the air was filled with the scratch of pens across paper, the rustle of documents, the polite murmur of instructions exchanged between senior and junior. It was quiet work, demanding patience and precision, but for many, it was also a stepping stone, a promise of stability, perhaps even advancement, in a world where respectability mattered, not far away. Shopkeepers prepared their counters for the day. In small grocers, barrels of flour and sugar were rolled into place, jars of sweets gleamed invitingly, and scales were polished until they caught the light. Bakers arranged their loaves in neat rows. Butchers displayed cuts of meat on wooden boards, and milliners set out hats adorned with ribbons and feathers. Each shopfront was a world unto itself, its character shaped by the goods within and the voice of the person who tended it. To step inside was to step into a relationship, customer and shopkeeper, bound together by trust, conversation, and the familiar rhythm of trade. Craftsmen and artisans carried on work that had changed little for generations. In workshops tucked behind narrow alleys, cobblers mended boots, their hands moving with quiet certainty as they stitched leather. Carpenters planed wood until it gleamed, shaping chairs, tables, and wardrobes. Blacksmiths hammered iron into tools and fittings, their forges glowing hot even as the streets outside lay damp and cool. These were the trades that built and sustained the city, each object made not by machines, but by hands that carried knowledge passed down through years. Imagine the sound of it all, the steady tap of a hammer, the hiss of hot metal in water, the rasp of a saw through wood. Together, these sounds formed a chorus of labor, never hurried, never silent. And then there were the great warehouses and docks where laborers shouldered crates, hauled barrels, and loaded goods destined for markets near and far. The Thames was crowded with ships, their cargoes spilling into the city with endless variety: spices, cotton, timber, tea, and countless other treasures of empire. Dock workers moved ceaselessly, their muscles straining, their voices calling to one another, their sweat mingling with the mist from the river. It was demanding work, often harsh, yet it gave the city its heartbeat of trade, the movement of goods that kept London alive. Women, too, carried the rhythm of labor in countless ways. Many worked as seamstresses, their eyes weary from long hours of stitching by lamplight, producing garments for shops and households. Others found employment as laundresses, scrubbing clothes until their hands were raw, hanging linen to dry in narrow yards where the sun barely reached. Domestic servants filled homes with their presence, cleaning, cooking, and caring for children. Their work was rarely celebrated, yet without them, the polished order of middle-class life could not have existed. For the poorest, work meant survival in its most immediate form. Children sold matches, flowers, or watercress in the streets, their small voices calling to passers-by. Men gathered at street corners, hoping for casual labor, unloading a wagon, carrying heavy loads, sweeping streets for a coin or two. Women sometimes stitched artificial flowers, made boxes, or took in washing, each task paying only pennies. The city offered countless forms of work, but not all were steady, and for many, each day was uncertain, its end dependent on chance. Yet, even in hardship, there was pride in labor. A shoemaker might run his fingers along a finished boot with quiet satisfaction. A clerk might admire the neatness of a ledger page filled with tidy lines. A laundress might fold a shirt and feel a moment of accomplishment. Work gave shape to the hours, and though it often wore people down, it also tied them to the great fabric of London, each task, however small, part of something vast. In a moment, we will pause to consider how children themselves fit into this world of labor, for their experiences were often very different from those of adults. But before we shift our gaze, let us linger on the rhythm of the day as it moved forward. Picture the city at noon, the streets alive with workers heading briefly to taverns or street stalls for food. Imagine the clatter of mugs, the laughter that broke out in stolen moments, the sigh of relief as a bench was found. Work was steady. But even the hardest day had pauses, small oases of rest that reminded people of their humanity. The afternoon stretched long, filled with tasks repeated over and over. Figures entered, shoes mended, boards cut, barrels lifted. And yet, as the hours passed, there was also anticipation, for work would eventually give way to evening, to family, to leisure. That knowledge, soft but steady, carried people through the hardest labors. And so, as we step back from this world of work, let us carry with us the sense of its rhythm, the scratch of pen on paper, the tap of hammer on leather, the creak of ropes at the dock, the rustle of fabric in a seamstress's hands. These were the sounds of London's lifeblood, constant and enduring, shaping not only the city's wealth, but the very texture of daily life. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let these rhythms soften into a gentle lull, the heartbeat of a city at work, steady, unceasing, yet always carrying its people toward another evening, another dawn, another day. In the story of Victorian London, children held a place both fragile and vibrant, for their days could be filled with laughter and play, or weighed down with work and worry. Tonight, let us wander softly into their world, the schoolrooms and the playgrounds, the street corners and the quiet nurseries, to see how young lives were shaped within the great city. Imagine first a nursery in a middle-class home, its walls papered with gentle patterns, its shelves lined with toys carved from wood or sewn from cloth. A nanny or governess moves quietly about, ensuring that the children are dressed neatly, their collars brushed, their hair tied with ribbon. Lessons might begin here at a small table, with alphabet cards and copybooks. The governess guiding young hands as they trace letters or recite sums. For these children, education was not only a privilege but a duty, one carefully tended within the safe boundaries of home. The sound of a piano lesson, the repetition of French vocabulary, or the steady rhythm of handwriting practice filled these rooms with a soft hum of purpose. Outside, in more modest homes, childhood often looked very different. For many, there was little time for play or study, for work pressed early upon their shoulders. A boy might spend his day selling newspapers at the corners of busy streets, his voice hoarse from calling headlines. A girl might carry baskets of watercress to sell, or sit for hours stitching artificial flowers for pennies. Their hands, small and nimble, were valued for tasks that demanded precision. Childhood for them was shortened, reshaped by necessity into something far closer to adulthood. Yet even in hardship, children found ways to play. Imagine a group gathered in a narrow alley, their bare feet slapping against the stones as they chase a hoop or kick a ball made from rags. Their laughter echoes off the walls, rising above the din of the streets. Simple games, hopscotch chalked onto paving stones, skipping ropes swung with rhythm, marbles flicked across the ground offered moments of escape. For a few minutes, the burdens of the day were forgotten, replaced by the universal joy of movement and companionship. For those fortunate enough to attend school, the days carried their own rhythm. In the early decades of the Victorian era, education was not yet universal, but as the century progressed, more and more children entered classrooms. Picture a long room filled with wooden benches, the air tinged with chalk dust. A teacher stood at the front, guiding recitations, while pupils bent over slates, scratching out sums with chalk. The discipline could be stern, the lessons repetitive, but for many children, these hours offered a door to another life, a chance to learn letters and numbers that might one day lift them into better circumstances. Sunday schools, too, played an important role, especially for working-class children. On Sundays, after church, they gathered in halls or chapels to learn Bible verses, hymns, and basic reading skills. These lessons, often taught by volunteers, carried with them not only education but also moral instruction, a belief that knowledge and faith could shape lives for the better. Imagine rows of children singing softly together, their voices rising like a gentle chorus, carrying both innocence and aspiration. Home life shaped childhood just as strongly as work or school. In wealthier households, nurseries were filled with dolls, rocking horses, and picture books, while in humbler homes, toys were improvised from scraps of wood or bits of cloth. Yet in both, the bond of family gave meaning to the days. A mother's voice telling a bedtime story, a father sharing news of the world, a sibling's hand clasped tightly in play. These were the small threads that wove warmth into young lives. No matter the material circumstances, and beyond the walls of home or school lay the great city itself, a playground and a danger in equal measure. Children clambered onto carts, peered into shop windows, and splashed in puddles after rain. They watched parades and processions, their eyes wide with wonder, and lingered outside theatres or music halls, hoping to catch a snatch of melody. London was vast and sometimes unforgiving, yet to a child, it was also a world of endless discovery in a moment. We will step more closely into the experiences of poor children, whose struggles and resilience left deep marks upon the fabric of the city. But before we do, let us pause to remember the gentler images: a nursery fire glowing warmly, a skipping rope tapping rhythmically on stone, a classroom filled with the low murmur of recitation. These are the quieter joys of childhood, moments of learning and laughter that have echoed across generations. As evening approached, children's worlds often returned to the circle of family. Bedtime was marked by rituals both simple and tender, prayers whispered softly, blankets tucked carefully, candles blown out one by one. For some, it was a moment of comfort, drifting into sleep with the warmth of love nearby. For others, it was a pause in hardship, a brief respite before another day of toil. And yet, in both, there was hope for childhood. No matter how brief or difficult, carried with it a spark of resilience, a promise of life unfolding. So, as you drift with me through these images, imagine the sound of children's laughter echoing faintly, the whisper of pages turning in a primer, the soft creak of a cradle rocking gently in the night. These are the sounds of young Londoners, each carrying their own story, each shaping the great story of the city in ways both small and lasting. In our next part, we will step more deeply into the hardships faced by poor children, the workhouses, the orphanages, and the resilience found in the darkest of places. But for now, let the image of play and learning remain, gentle and soothing, as a reminder that even amid struggle, joy still found a way to blossom now. As you drift further into sleep, let the laughter of Victorian children fade softly, like echoes carried on the evening breeze, leaving only the comfort of rest behind. When we think of Victorian childhood, we might imagine playrooms with rocking horses, gentle lessons at a governess's table, or skipping ropes tapping on cobblestones. Yet for many of London's children, life carried a different weight. Poverty pressed upon their days, and the spaces they knew best were not nurseries or schoolrooms, but workhouses, orphanages, and the harsh realities of street labor. Tonight, let us wander slowly into this world, tenderly, carefully, with respect to glimpse both the struggles and the quiet resilience that shaped so many young lives. Imagine a narrow street in the East End, its houses pressed close together, their bricks darkened by soot. Here, children dart barefoot through the lanes, their clothes worn thin, their faces smudged with grime. They carry baskets of watercress, matches, or newspapers, calling softly to passers-by. Each penny earned a small victory against hunger. The work is hard, the hours long, and yet their laughter still rings out in fleeting moments, echoing through alleys where games are improvised from little more than imagination. Childhood here was never free of care, but even within struggle, the spark of play survived. For some children, family itself was absent. Orphanages dotted the city, offering shelter and training for those who had nowhere else to turn. One of the most famous was Dr. Bernardo's home, where children were clothed, fed, and taught trades that might help them build a future. Imagine the dormitories lined with neat rows of small beds, the orderly meals, the lessons in sewing or carpentry. Life there was disciplined, but it carried with it a sense of protection, a sense that the world had not entirely turned away. For many, it was a place where despair softened into hope, however modest. Yet not all institutions carried such comfort. The workhouse, dreaded by poor families, loomed as a last resort. Within its walls, families were often separated, husbands from wives, children from parents, each sent to their own ward. The buildings were stark, the routines strict. Children might be set to tasks such as picking oakum, pulling apart old rope fibers, or scrubbing endless rows of floors. The food was plain and meager, thin gruel, bread, and little else. Yet even here, in the midst of hardship, resilience grew. Children found companionship in one another, whispered stories at night, and shared small kindnesses that lightened the burden of the day. Some poor children found themselves apprenticed into trades, learning skills that would shape their lives. Others, less fortunate, worked as chimney sweeps, their small bodies climbing narrow flues to scrape away soot. It was dangerous, dirty work, and yet for many, it was a path their families felt they could not refuse. Street performers, too, were often children, singing songs, dancing, or playing simple instruments to earn coins from strangers. The city was their stage, and survival their only script. Education offered a narrow but growing doorway out of such hardship. Ragged schools, run by charities and volunteers, opened their doors to children too poor to pay fees. In crowded rooms, by the dim light of lanterns, Children learned their letters, practiced reading aloud, and discovered stories beyond their own lives. Imagine the hush of such a room, the scratch of chalk on slates, the murmur of voices reciting lines. For some, these lessons were the first steps toward literacy, and with it, the possibility of change. To learn to read was to glimpse a different world, and to believe, even faintly, that another path might be possible, despite all obstacles. Children often carried within them a resilience that astonished those who observed it. Visitors to the East End wrote of their brightness, their quick wit, their ability to find joy in the smallest of things. A rag ball could spark a game. A chalk mark could create a playground. A song hummed softly could lift spirits, if only for a while. Their endurance was quiet but profound, shaping not only their own lives, but the very character of London itself. In a moment, we will step back into the wider streets, to see how the city sought to reform these hardships through philanthropy, law, and education. But before we leave, let us pause in these narrow lanes and crowded halls, listening to the voices of children. Some cry out in weariness, some whisper in dreams, and some laugh despite it all. Together, they form a chorus that tells us not only of suffering, but of perseverance, courage, and an unquenchable spirit. So, as you rest, imagine the small, gentle details. A match girl warming her hands near a brazier, an orphan leaning over his first book, a group of children sharing crusts of bread and laughter in equal measure. These images, though born of struggle, remind us that even in the darkest corners of the city, light still found its way now, as you drift further into sleep. Let the resilience of these children echo softly, not as a cry, but as a lull, steady, enduring, a reminder that hope can live quietly even in hardship. As the hardships of Victorian life grew more visible, so too did the response of those who sought to ease them. The city, with all its contrasts of wealth and poverty, inspired a tide of charitable efforts, reform movements, and quiet acts of kindness. Tonight, let us drift into that world of philanthropy and reform, where churches, charities, and concerned citizens worked to bring light into the shadows of daily life. Imagine a narrow hall lit by oil lamps, its benches crowded with children who had little else in the way of comfort. This was a ragged school, one of the many founded to provide education for the poorest children. Volunteers, often clergymen and their wives, guided lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, their voices steady, their patience tested but enduring. The air was chilly, the walls plain, yet for those children, the school was a doorway into possibility. The scratch of chalk on slate, the slow recitation of letters, the gentle encouragement of a teacher. These sounds carried with them the promise of a future less bound by poverty. Charitable missions extended beyond education. Soup kitchens opened in church basements, offering bowls of hot broth and bread to those who might otherwise go hungry. Picture the line of weary figures waiting in the cold, their breath clouding. In the air, their eyes brightening as warmth and nourishment were placed in their hands. For a moment, the harshness of the city softened, replaced by the simple comfort of food shared freely. Organizations such as the Salvation Army, founded in the late 1860s, carried their message into the streets, combining spiritual care with practical aid. Their brass bands played hymns that rang brightly across squares and markets, while their workers offered shelter, clothing, and encouragement to the destitute. Imagine hearing that music rising above the noise of traffic, a reminder that even in the most crowded, weary corners of London, hope could be heard like a clear, steady note. Philanthropists of the age often dedicated fortunes to social causes. Angela Burdick-Coutts, sometimes called the wealthiest woman in England, devoted her life to improving housing, education, and sanitation for the poor. Dr. Bernardo founded his homes for children, creating places where orphans might grow with care and guidance. Others established hospitals, work training centers, and missions, each one a small beacon in the vast sprawl of the city. Their efforts were not perfect, but they carried a deep sense of responsibility, a belief that wealth and influence ought to serve those in need. Reform extended into the streets themselves. Laws were passed gradually to limit child labor, to improve working conditions, to provide for public health. Inspectors began to check factories, schools became more widely available, and new housing projects sought to replace the crumbling tenements of the poorest districts. Imagine the slow but steady change. A new school opening its doors in a crowded neighborhood, a fresh water pump installed in a square, a row of model dwellings rising with windows wide and clean. These were small transformations, but together they began to shift the rhythm of daily life. And yet, philanthropy was not always grand. It also lived in the quiet acts of ordinary people, a neighbor sharing a loaf of bread, a seamstress mending clothes for a friend, a stranger placing a coin in the hand of a hungry child. These gestures, unnoticed by history, formed the hidden fabric of kindness that softened the edges of hardship. In the great tapestry of London life, they were threads of compassion, delicate yet enduring. In a moment, we will wander into the spaces of leisure and improvement that philanthropy created: libraries, reading rooms, and public baths. But, for now, let us pause to consider the mood of the city in this era of reform. It was a mood of awakening, of noticing. Writers like Charles Dickens shone a light upon poverty through their stories, stirring readers' consciences. Journalists exposed the conditions of workhouses and slums. Artists painted scenes of both despair and resilience. All these voices joined the reformers, creating a chorus that urged change. Imagine, then, London, in the late 19th century, still struggling, still vast and imperfect, yet threaded with new beginnings. A child walking home from a ragged school, with a book tucked under their arm. A mother carrying a pot of soup given freely at a mission. A group of boys learning a trade at a charitable workshop, their hands rough but their eyes steady with hope. These were the quiet fruits of philanthropy, the tender results of reform. And as the city grew, so too did its conscience. The idea that every life held dignity, that every child deserved education, that every family deserved shelter. These ideas spread slowly, gently, yet powerfully. They did not erase hardship, but they carved pathways towards something brighter. So as you rest, imagine the glow of a lamp in a ragged school, the warmth of soup on a cold night, the sound of hymns rising above the city streets. These are the images of Victorian philanthropy, small, steady lights flickering against the fog, guiding the city toward a gentler tomorrow. In our next part, we will step into the public spaces that blossomed from this spirit, the libraries, the baths, and the cultural institutions that offered comfort, knowledge, and beauty to everyday Londoners. For now, let the kindness of these scenes linger softly with you, a reminder that even in the hardest times, compassion found its way into daily life. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the music of a Salvation Army band fade gently, leaving behind only the warmth of kindness and the promise of rest. Victorian London, vast and bustling, was not only a city of work and hardship, it was also a city of new opportunities for learning and self-improvement. In the mid and later years of the century, public institutions began to open their doors more widely, offering libraries, baths, museums, and quiet halls where ordinary people might find knowledge, cleanliness, or even a moment of beauty. Tonight, let us wander slowly through these places, pausing to feel their atmosphere, their dignity, and the gentle comfort they gave to the people who entered. Imagine first a public library, its tall windows allowing light to fall across shelves lined with rows of books. The air is cool and hushed, carrying the faint scent of leather and paper. Tables are neatly arranged, each with lamps that glow warmly in the evening. A clerk or librarian moves quietly, guiding visitors to books, reminding children to lower their voices. For many who had never before owned more than a Bible or a single storybook, to step into such a space was to enter another world. History, poetry, travel, science, all lay waiting, accessible to those who wished to learn. Imagine the feeling of sitting with a borrowed volume, tracing words slowly, and feeling the world unfold beyond the narrow streets outside. Reading rooms, too, became important gathering places. Their newspapers and journals were spread across long tables, allowing men and women alike to follow debates in Parliament, to learn of discoveries, to feel connected to the great movements of the age. The rustle of turning pages, the soft murmur of voices, the tapping of a pen as notes were taken. These small sounds filled the air with a sense of purpose. To be in a reading room was to be part of something larger, to step into a quiet rhythm of shared learning. Public baths offered another form of renewal. For many living in cramped houses or tenements without proper plumbing, the chance to wash properly was rare. Public bathhouses, built in various districts of the city, provided warm water, soap, and a clean space for those who might otherwise have had none. Imagine walking in from the soot and noise of the street into a tiled hall. The air warm and damp, the sound of water echoing softly. Families queued for their turn, children splashing happily, mothers sighing in relief at the comfort of hot water. Cleanliness was more than hygiene, it was dignity. And for countless Londoners, these baths offered a moment of renewal, a reminder of humanity in the midst of struggle. Museums, too, became places where ordinary people could step away from the grind of work and glimpse something greater. The British Museum, with its towering halls of marble and glass cases filled with artifacts, welcomed visitors free of charge. Imagine the awe of a young clerk or seamstress standing before an ancient statue, or gazing at maps of lands they had only ever dreamed of. The natural history collections displayed shells, fossils, and specimens from around the world, each one a window into nature's vast story. To walk those halls was to feel the city expand outward, to realize that knowledge was not reserved for the wealthy but shared with all who entered. Art galleries, too, carried a similar magic. The National Gallery in Trafalgar Square displayed paintings that glowed with color and light, offering beauty to those who had little of it in their daily lives. Imagine standing quietly before a canvas, letting your eyes wander across brushstrokes, feeling a hush fall over you as the painting seemed to whisper its own story. For a working man or woman, such moments were rare treasures, memories carried back into the noise of the streets in smaller ways. 2. Victorian London offered spaces of self-improvement. Mechanics, institutes and lecture halls provided classes in science, literature and trade skills. Societies gathered to discuss astronomy, natural history, or political reform. Imagine a group of men and women sitting in rows of wooden chairs, a lecturer at the front pointing to a blackboard, explaining the stars or the structure of the human body, their notebooks filled slowly with careful words, their minds opening as they listened. For many, these lectures were the only formal education they would ever know, and yet they filled the evenings with purpose and light. Philanthropists often supported these institutions, believing strongly that education and culture uplifted the poor. But beyond the intentions of reformers, the people themselves embraced these opportunities with quiet determination. A tailor might spend his one free evening reading at a library. A laundress might save her pennies to attend a lecture. A child might walk miles simply to wander through a museum's halls. These small choices, repeated across thousands of lives, shaped the fabric of the city with a spirit of aspiration. In a moment, we will step into the places of entertainment and joy, the fairs, the music, the small pleasures that lifted spirits after work. But before we leave, let us linger here in the quiet dignity of these institutions. Imagine a man washing his face in warm water after a week of toil, sighing in relief. Imagine a young woman tracing her finger across a book's pages, sounding out words she had only just learned. Imagine a family standing together before a painting, hushed as beauty filled them with wonder. These are the images of Victorian renewal, not grand or dramatic, but gentle, steady, and deeply human. They remind us that the city was not only soot and hardship, but also kindness, aspiration, and the slow unfolding of opportunity. So, as you rest tonight, picture the lamplight glowing on polished wood in a library, the soft steam rising from a bathhouse, the quiet awe of a museum hall. These are the places where Londoners found comfort, knowledge, and hope. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the hush of a reading room and the warmth of clean water fold around you, carrying you gently toward dreams. If work and duty shaped the rhythm of Victorian London, so too did moments of play, amusement, and delight. Amid the coal smoke and the endless bustle, people sought laughter, music, and the simple pleasures that made life feel lighter. Tonight, let us wander slowly into that world of entertainment, the fairs, the music halls, and the small joys that filled London's evenings and weekends with warmth. Imagine a crowded fairground, the air alive with the sound of fiddles and laughter, the scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with the sharper tang of gingerbread, while stalls displayed bright ribbons, trinkets, and sweets. Children darted through the crowds, clutching sticks of toffee, while adults paused to watch jugglers, acrobats, or conjurers performing their tricks. Fairs were noisy, colourful, and often chaotic, but within their swirl of sound and spectacle, they offered escape, a chance to forget the weight of the week and surrender to delight. Music halls became the heartbeat of popular entertainment in Victorian London. Picture a long, glowing hall filled with rows of tables, where audiences sipped beer and ate meat pies as performers took the stage. The air was thick with smoke, the mood lively, the laughter frequent. Singers belted out comic songs that the whole audience joined in, their voices rising in unison until the rafters seemed to shake. Dancers, comedians, and novelty acts followed, each earning applause and cheers. It was entertainment for the people, affordable, accessible, and endlessly cheerful. The music hall was not about refinement. It was about community, about the joy of sharing an evening together. In contrast, theatres offered a more formal kind of amusement. The West End glittered with playhouses, where audiences watched Shakespeare, melodramas, and operas. Imagine the gaslight chandeliers sparkling above velvet seats. The hush as the curtain rose, the swell of an orchestra filling the air. For those who could afford it, an evening at the theatre was an event, an occasion for finery and conversation as much as for the performance itself. Yet even in humbler districts, smaller theatres thrived, offering stirring plays and lively shows that drew crowds from all walks of life. Beyond halls and theatres, the city's streets themselves became stages. Street musicians played fiddles, accordions, or barrel organs, their melodies winding through alleys and squares. Crowds sometimes gathered to listen, dropping coins into hats or tins. Children clapped along, and neighbors paused in their errands to hum familiar tunes. In these simple, unpolished performances, the city found its soundtrack cheerful, ever-changing, and deeply human. Public houses, too, offered entertainment of a more intimate kind. Taverns and pubs rang with conversation, the clink of glasses, and the occasional burst of song. For many workers, the pub was not simply a place to drink, but a gathering space, a second home where friendships were formed and stories were shared. Imagine the glow of a fire in the hearth, the warmth of company after a long day, the hum of voices rising together in song. These small comforts held great meaning in lives that were often difficult. Not all amusements were loud. Parks and gardens, which we have visited before, also served as spaces for quiet leisure. On summer evenings, bandstands came alive with music, their notes drifting gently across lawns where families picnicked or couples strolled hand in hand. Rowing boats skimmed across lakes, their oars dipping steadily into the water. Ice cream vendors wheeled carts along paths, their bells tinkling merrily. The air carried laughter, but also calm, the soothing rhythm of a city at play. Seasonal celebrations added their own brightness. At Christmas, shop windows glittered with decorations. Carolers sang in the frosty air, and markets filled with oranges, nuts, and spices. The streets seemed to glow with warmth, even in the coldest months. Summer fairs, May Day festivities, and harvest celebrations brought their own colors, ensuring that each season carried joy to balance its labors. For children, amusement was often found in the simplest of things. A skipping rope, a kite, a game of marbles or hopscotch drawn in chalk could bring hours of delight. Penny gaff theatres, small, makeshift stages, often set up in rooms above pubs, offered cheap shows filled with songs, jokes, and stories. A single penny was the price of an escape into laughter. These humble entertainments, though modest, filled children's hearts with wonder in a moment. We will step into the more refined entertainments of the era: concerts, lectures, and exhibitions, where learning and leisure mingled together. But before we leave, let us linger in the cheerful glow of these small joys. Picture a music hall crowd roaring with laughter, a fiddler playing beneath a street lamp, a family sharing gingerbread at a fair, a pub full of song on a winter's night. These are the images of London at play, moments of laughter and light woven into the fabric of daily life. And so, as the city's amusements fade softly into memory, we carry with us the sense of their warmth. They were not always grand, but they mattered deeply, for they reminded Londoners, rich and poor alike, that life was not only work and worry, but also laughter, song, and the gentle relief of joy now. As you drift further into sleep, let the sounds of a music hall chorus, faint and merry, echo softly in the distance, carrying you gently into dreams, while music halls and fairs filled the city with cheer. Victorian London also offered entertainments of a quieter, more refined nature. These were the spaces where music soared, where ideas were shared, and where wonders of art and science were displayed to curious crowds. Tonight, let us stroll slowly into concert halls, lecture theatres, and grand exhibitions, pausing to feel the dignity, the awe, and the gentle pleasure they brought to daily life. Imagine first the solemn beauty of a concert hall. The audience files in quietly, ladies in gowns of silk and lace, gentlemen in polished boots and tall hats. Gas chandeliers glow overhead, their light catching on gilded balconies. The air hums with anticipation, hushed but full of expectancy. And then, as the musicians take their seats, the sound begins. Violins rise together, cellos answer, brass and woodwinds swell, and the hall fills with music that seems to lift the very air. For those seated there, whether wealthy patrons in the front rows or modest listeners, in the gallery above, the experience was transcendent. Music, solemn or joyous, carried them away from the grind of everyday life into something luminous and shared. London boasted many such spaces. The Crystal Palace, first built for the Great Exhibition of 1851, later became a centre for concerts and spectacles, its vast glass halls echoing with sound. Imagine an orchestra playing within that cavern of light, the music ringing beneath soaring iron beams, mingling with the faint scent of plants in its winter gardens. To sit within those walls was to feel part of something modern, something grand, a testament to progress and imagination. Lectures, too, drew eager audiences. In mechanics institutes, working men and women gathered after long days of labor to hear talks on astronomy, chemistry, geography, or literature. Picture the lecturer at the front, chalk in hand, sketching the orbit of a planet on a blackboard, or holding up a mineral that glittered beneath the lamplight. The audience sat rapt, their notebooks open, their eyes alight with curiosity. These evenings were not only about knowledge, but about possibility, the belief that minds, no matter their background, could grow, explore, and belong to the great unfolding story of science and discovery. Public lectures extended beyond institutes. At the Royal Institution, scientists like Michael Faraday gave demonstrations of electricity and magnetism, dazzling audiences with sparks and experiments. Imagine the hush of the room as Faraday lit a lamp with a wave of his hand, or spun a coil that glowed with unseen power. For those present, these moments were like glimpses of magic, except that the magic was real. The future was being born before their eyes. Exhibitions, too, held enormous appeal. The Great Exhibition of 1851, housed in the vast Crystal Palace, was the first of its kind, a display of industry, art, and innovation from across the world. Crowds filed through its glittering glass halls, marveling at machines, textiles, instruments, and curiosities from distant lands. Imagine the awe of seeing a steam engine up close, or fabrics woven with colors never before imagined, or a case of intricate scientific instruments gleaming in the light. For many visitors, it was the first time they realized how vast and connected the world had become. In later years, other exhibitions followed, each one bringing fresh marvels. Art and design, science and invention, history and nature, all were placed within reach of ordinary Londoners. Families wandered slowly through the displays, children gazing wide-eyed at fossils or at models of ships, their parents murmuring softly about the wonders of progress. These exhibitions were not only amusements, but lessons in modern life. reflections of a world that seemed to grow larger and faster with every passing year. But refined entertainment was not always about grandeur. Sometimes it was about the quiet gathering of people around shared interests. Literary societies met to discuss books and ideas. Temperance halls hosted earnest speeches about sobriety and reform. Small theatres presented serious dramas or readings of poetry, their audiences leaning forward in dimly lit rooms, listening with care. Each of these spaces offered not only amusement, but a sense of belonging, of minds meeting in harmony. For women, in particular, lectures and cultural events opened doors to worlds beyond the domestic sphere. Many found inspiration in talks about literature, art, or social reform, carrying new ideas back into their homes and conversations. Imagine a young woman sitting in a hall, her notebook balanced on her knee, writing carefully as a lecturer explained a distant country or a scientific principle. Her heart stirred with the thought that knowledge was hers to claim, just as much as anyone's. In a moment, we will return to the everyday pleasures of the city, the small entertainments found in taverns, gardens, and neighborhood gatherings. But before we leave these grand halls behind, let us pause once more to feel their atmosphere. The hush of a concert hall as the final note fades. The spark of wonder as a scientist reveals a hidden truth. The slow shuffle of feet along a great exhibition hall, voices hushed in awe. These are moments of shared humanity, reminders that amid the smoke and clamor of London, beauty and knowledge were also cherished. So as you rest tonight, imagine the soft glow of lamps in a lecture hall, the swell of violins filling the air, the glitter of glass in an exhibition space. These images carry with them a calm sense of possibility that life, however difficult, could be lifted by music, by knowledge, by wonder now, as you drift further into sleep. Let the quiet echoes of a concert hall linger like a lullaby, fading slowly into the hush of dreams. Victorian London was not a single place, but many cities woven together, each with its own rhythm, its own scent, its own sound. To walk from the wide avenues of the West End to the narrow courts of the East End was to move through worlds that felt utterly different, and yet they lay side by side, joined by bridges, roads, and the endless flow of people. Tonight, let us drift gently through these neighborhoods, feeling the contrasts and sensing the way they shaped the daily lives of those who called them home. Imagine first the West End, where broad streets were lined with elegant houses, their facades neat, their windows bright with lamplight. Carriages rattled past smart shops in Regent Street, where glass windows gleamed with silks, hats, and fine wares. Ladies, shaded by parasols, strolled arm in arm along the pavements, pausing to admire displays, while gentlemen tipped their hats politely as acquaintances passed. The air here carried the scent of perfume and polished wood, the hum of conversation softened by formality. To live in the West End was to belong to a world of comfort, where drawing rooms were adorned with chandeliers, and evenings were spent at theatres, concerts, or quiet dinners in refined company. The squares of Bloomsbury and Mayfair offered their own charms. Picture leafy squares where iron railings enclosed neat gardens, and where nannies pushed prams while children played. Townhouses rose in ordered rows, their door knockers polished until they gleamed. Within, parlours were arranged with care, libraries lined with books, and servants moved discreetly through hallways. The West End was a place where daily life unfolded with quiet dignity. where respectability and refinement were as much a part of the air as the chiming of church bells. But cross the city eastward, toward the docks and factories, and the scene shifted dramatically. The East End bustled with energy and struggle, its narrow streets crowded, its buildings worn and weathered. Tenements pressed close together, laundry lines stretched across alleys, and the air carried the sharp tang of smoke, tar, and fish from the river. Here, families often crowded into single rooms, their lives spilling into the streets, where children played, vendors shouted, and neighbors gathered in clusters of conversation. Markets in Whitechapel and Spitalfields rang with the calls of traders selling fruit, fish, and bread, their stalls piled high, their voices rising in friendly argument. Costermongers pushed carts laden with goods, weaving through the crowds. The atmosphere was lively, boisterous, full of color, yet also marked by hardship. Poverty pressed close in the East End, and life was often uncertain, yet the sense of community was strong, a bond formed in shared survival. Imagine the contrasts. In the West End, the clink of silver spoons on china. In the East End, the clatter of tin cups in a crowded tavern. In the West End, polished boots tapping on clean pavements. In the East End, bare feet splashing through puddles on uneven stones. Yet both were London. Both carried their own music, their own truth. The docks themselves were a world apart, vast, noisy, filled with ships unloading cargoes from every corner of the globe. Dock workers hauled barrels and crates, their muscles straining, their voices shouting orders over the din. The air smelled of salt and spice, tea and timber, a mingling of scents that spoke of empire. Life around the docks was harsh, but also vibrant, with taverns, boarding houses, and endless bustle at all hours of day and night. Asterisk and still. Even in the poorest streets, moments of beauty appeared. A flower girl's basket brightened a corner with color. A neighbor's kindness softened a day of hunger. Children's laughter echoed through alleys, turning narrow spaces into playgrounds. The East End may have been weary, but it was never silent, never without its own spark of life. In a moment, we will step into the hidden lanes and alleys of London, where stories unfolded in quieter, more intimate ways. But before we move onward, let us pause here, between the West and the East, and sense the balance of contrasts. On one side, elegance and formality. On the other, struggle and community. Between them lay countless shades of life. Middle-class neighborhoods, suburban stretches, quiet villages absorbed by the city's growth. Together, they formed a mosaic that was London itself. So, as you rest tonight, imagine yourself standing on a bridge over the Thames, looking westward toward shining lights and eastward toward the smoky bustle of docks. Both views are part of one city, both alive, both breathing. London was, and is, a place of contrasts, but within those contrasts lies its soul. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the quiet hum of the West End and the lively cries of the East End blend softly together, like two melodies meeting in harmony, carrying you gently toward dreams. Asterisk London, with its grand avenues and bustling markets, was also a city of secrets. Beyond the wide streets and squares lay a maze of alleys, courts, and narrow lanes, places where life unfolded more privately, more intimately. These were the hidden corners of Victorian London, where neighbors leaned from windows to call across to one another, where children played in tight spaces, and where stories, unnoticed by the larger city, filled the air like whispered lullabies. Tonight, let us wander slowly into those smaller worlds. Imagine turning from a busy thoroughfare into a narrow alley, so slender that you could stretch out your arms and almost touch both walls. Laundry lines crisscrossed above, fluttering with shirts and petticoats. The cobblestones beneath your feet were uneven, worn smooth in places by decades of footsteps. A single gas lamp glowed faintly at the far end, casting a soft halo that barely reached the middle of the lane. The air carried the mingled scents of cooking, coal smoke, and damp stone. Here, the great roar of London softened into something closer, gentler, a hum of everyday life. Courts and yards tucked between buildings held small communities within them. Imagine a courtyard where a few families shared a pump for water, their buckets clanking as they filled them in the morning. Children chased one another in circles, dodging barrels and baskets. A mother sat on a doorstep, mending clothes while keeping watch over her little ones. Neighbors greeted one another with nods, exchanged small bits of news, or shared food when fortunes allowed. In these confined spaces, lives pressed closely together, and though privacy was scarce, companionship was abundant. The soundscape of these hidden corners was distinct. The creak of doors, the splash of water, the rattle of pans, the laughter of children playing hopscotch on chalked stones. Now and then, a costermonger's call would drift in from the street beyond, or the faint strains of a street fiddler's tune would reach the courtyard. These sounds wove together into a lullaby of life, humble but constant, shaping the days with familiar rhythms. For the poorest, such corners could be cramped and difficult. Rooms often housed several families, each space divided by curtains or thin partitions. Yet even in hardship, people made homes. A sprig of flowers in a jug brightened a windowsill. A small picture hung on a wall gave comfort. A fire, however small, gathered everyone in warmth. Life was not easy, but it was lived fully, with resilience and a determination to find beauty wherever possible. In wealthier parts of the city, hidden spaces also existed, though in different form. Behind elegant houses were mews, narrow lanes lined with stables and coach houses, where grooms and coachmen lived and worked. These mews, quieter and tucked away, carried their own charm. The smell of hay, the soft stamp of horses, the neat rows of carriages waiting for evening outings. Servants passed through these back lanes, moving discreetly between the grandeur of the front streets and the humbler work that sustained it. Even here, life pulsed quietly. Away from the polished facades, alleyways often held small trades, cobblers repairing boots by the light of a single lamp, seamstresses stitching at windows, tinkers offering to mend pots and pans. These little workshops gave the back streets their own rhythm, quieter than the main roads but equally vital. Passing through, one might hear the steady tap of a hammer, the snip of scissors through cloth, or the scrape of a file across metal. Each sound was a reminder that industry did not only live in factories, but also in these hidden, humble places. Children gave the back streets much of their energy. With little room to roam, they invented games that fitted the space. Marbles rolled across cobbles, hoops spun between doorways, skipping ropes slapped against stone. Their laughter rose above the narrow lanes, brightening corners that might otherwise have seemed grey. To hear their voices was to know that even in the tightest spaces, joy found room to breathe. At night, these corners changed. The lamplight grew dimmer, shadows deepened, and the hum of voices fell into quiet. The sound of a lullaby might drift from an open window, or the creak of a door as someone returned late from work. Cats prowled silently along walls, their eyes gleaming faintly. The stillness carried a kind of peace, a reminder that even in the crowded city, moments of calm could be found in the hidden folds. In a moment, we will step into the world of food and drink, the markets, taverns, and kitchens that sustain Victorian Londoners. But before we move forward, let us pause to rest in these backstreets. Imagine sitting on a doorstep as evening falls, listening to neighbors chatting softly, watching the lamplight flicker on the cobblestones. Life here was not grand, but it was close, human, and deeply alive. So as you rest tonight, carry with you the image of a narrow court lit by a single lamp, of voices mingling gently in the dusk, of children's laughter echoing against walls. These are the hidden corners of London, the small, quiet spaces where daily life unfolded unseen, yet where the heart of the city beat most steadily. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the hush of these back streets surround you like a blanket, warm and familiar, carrying you softly into dreams. Every city carries its own flavors, its own sense rising from kitchens, markets, and taverns. Victorian London was no exception, and to step into its streets was to be surrounded by the aromas of bread just baked, roasted chestnuts in winter, fried fish sizzling in oil, and the comforting steam of hot tea. Tonight, let us drift slowly through the foods and flavors of this world, imagining the meals that sustained the city, from the humblest bowl of broth to the grandest table of silver and china. Begin at the morning markets, where stalls brimmed with fresh produce. At Covent Garden, baskets overflowed with apples, pears, and plums, their colors bright against the pale dawn light. Farmers called their prices, their voices warm and hearty, while porters carried sacks of potatoes and cabbages upon their shoulders. The air smelled of earth and freshness, damp with the scent of leaves. Buyers moved from stall to stall, baskets swinging, selecting what they could afford. To walk here was to feel the abundance of the countryside flowing directly into the heart of the city. In Billingsgate Market, the scene was livelier still. Barrels of fish were hauled from boats, gleaming silver in the early morning. The voices of fishwives rose above the din, strong and cheerful, calling out the day's catch. Eels wriggled in tubs, oysters were shucked on the spot, and herrings glistened in piles. The air was sharp with salt and brine, a scent that lingered on the hands and clothes of those who worked there. For many Londoners, fish from these markets was a daily meal, boiled, fried, or stewed into pies that filled homes with savory steam. But not all food came fresh from markets. Street sellers brought warmth and flavor to the pavements at every hour. Picture a muffin man with his tray of baked goods, ringing his bells softly as he passed. Hear the chestnut seller in winter, his brazier glowing, the shells cracking as he turned them with a scoop. In the evening, the scent of fried fish drifted from small stalls, often joined with thick slices of bread, an early version of what would one day be called fish and chips. These foods were simple, but they comforted, warming hands as well as bellies, in humbler homes. Meals were plain but sustaining. A pot of stew might simmer all day, filled with scraps of meat, potatoes, and turnips. Bread and cheese were staples, as was porridge, eaten warm in the morning. Tea, strong and sweetened with sugar when possible, was the drink of choice, its steam rising like comfort itself from chipped mugs. On Sundays, if fortune allowed, a joint of beef or lamb might roast in the oven, filling the house with rich aroma. and leftovers would stretch through the week in pies or soups. Middle-class households enjoyed more variety, with servants preparing meals of several courses. A family dinner might begin with soup, followed by roasted poultry, vegetables, and puddings sweet with currants or golden syrup. The table would be set with gleaming cutlery, polished glasses, and perhaps even a floral centerpiece. For dessert, fruits, nuts, or custards brought the meal to a gentle close. Meals here were not only nourishment, but also rituals. Moments when family gathered to share conversation and reinforce bonds. For the wealthy, dining was an art. Imagine long tables set with silver candelabra, crystal glasses, and fine china. Courses flowed in stately order: fish, game, roasts, vegetables, sauces, puddings, and delicate sweets. Wines from France and Portugal filled glasses, while footmen moved quietly, serving with precision. To sit at such a table was not only to eat, but to participate in a performance of wealth and refinement, where every detail, from the folded napkin to the choice of dessert, spoke of status. Taverns and pubs provided another face of London's food culture. Here stews and pies were served with mugs of ale, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Workers gathered to eat and drink together, their conversations lively, their hunger eased by simple but hearty fare. Imagine sitting at a wooden table with a steaming pie before you, the crust golden, the filling rich with meat and gravy. Around you, the hum of voices rose and fell, carrying stories of the day, jokes shared, and songs begun without warning. Sweets and treats added delight to daily life. Penny stalls offered boiled sweets in jars, sticky toffees, and sticks of rock. Children pressed their noses to glass windows, gazing at cakes and biscuits displayed in bakeries. At fairs, candied apples and gingerbread tempted all who passed. These small indulgences brought joy, their flavors lingering long after the last bite. Food was also shaped by ritual and season. At Christmas, tables filled with puddings, dense with fruit and brandy, turkeys roasted to perfection, and mince pies fragrant with spice. Easter brought hot cross buns, their soft dough marked with a cross of icing or flour paste. Even in the poorest homes, these holidays carried tastes that spoke of celebration, of warmth shared in the coldest months. In a moment, we will step from kitchens and taverns into the rhythms of drinking the tea tables, the coffee houses, the pubs that shaped social life. But before we move onward, let us pause in this feast of flavors. Imagine the steam rising from a bowl of stew, the crackle of chestnuts roasting on a brazier, the sparkle of crystal in a candlelit dining room. These were the tastes of Victorian London, humble and grand, daily and festive, each carrying its own story. So as you rest tonight, picture yourself with a warm mug of tea in your hands, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread, the sound of neighbors laughing as they share a meal. These are the comforts of food, as timeless as they are soothing, carrying body and soul into gentle rest. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the flavors of the city fade softly on your tongue, sweet, savory, warm, leaving behind only calm and contentment. If food gave Londoners their daily strength, then drink gave them pause, comfort, and connection. In Victorian London, beverages were more than simple refreshment. They were rituals, markers of class, and companions to both work and leisure. Tonight, let us drift slowly through the world of tea tables, coffee houses, and taverns, savoring the gentle rhythms they brought into daily life. begin with tea. The true heartbeat of Victorian refreshment. Imagine a kettle simmering gently on the hob, steam rising as water is poured into a waiting pot. The leaves unfurl, filling the air with their warm, fragrant aroma. A splash of milk, a spoonful of sugar, perhaps a slice of lemon, each cup carried comfort in its warmth. For the middle and upper classes, tea was served in fine porcelain, poured by hostesses with grace, accompanied by plates of cakes, biscuits, or thin sandwiches of cucumber and butter. The ritual itself mattered as much as the taste, the clink of cups, the polite murmur of conversation, the pause in the day that allowed companionship to blossom. For the working classes, tea was simpler but no less beloved. Strong, often sweetened, and poured into sturdy mugs. It was a daily necessity, warming hands and soothing bodies after long hours of labor. Even in the humblest homes, the sound of tea being poured was a moment of reassurance. Imagine a laundress setting down her heavy basket, sighing with relief as she sipped her mug, the steam curling gently into the evening air. Tea was both comfort and fuel, a drink that crossed class lines and became a symbol of British life itself. Coffee, though less widespread, carried its own traditions. Coffee houses, once central to London's public life, still lingered in Victorian times, though their role had shifted. Some were meeting places for businessmen, where deals were made and news exchanged over steaming cups. Others catered to writers, artists, or political thinkers, who lingered for hours in smoky rooms filled with the hum of conversation. Imagine the air heavy with the scent of roasted beans, the scrape of chairs across wooden floors, the rustle of newspapers being unfolded. To sip coffee here was to join a world of ideas, a slower rhythm where thoughts unfolded alongside each bitter, fragrant cup. Public houses, or pubs, were another cornerstone of refreshment. In taverns and alehouses scattered across the city, men and women gathered to drink ale, porter, gin, or whiskey. The drinks were hearty, sometimes strong, but it was the atmosphere that mattered most. Wooden tables, a fire glowing in the hearth, the clink of mugs raised in cheer. These spaces were as much about fellowship as they were about drink. Imagine the sound of laughter rising above the din, the friendly banter of neighbors, the warmth of belonging. For many workers, the pub was a second home, a place to rest weary limbs, share stories, and find companionship in the company of others. But not all drinks carried joy. Gin, notorious since the previous century, still haunted the poorest districts. Cheap and potent, it offered escape, but also despair. Temperance movements rose in response, urging sobriety and offering alternatives such as coffee rooms and temperance taverns, where lemonade or ginger beer replaced spirits. Imagine the earnest speeches of reformers, the banners carried in parades, the soft fizz of ginger beer poured into glasses as a hopeful substitute. These efforts reflected the city's struggle to balance comfort with caution, refreshment with restraint beyond taverns and tea tables. Refreshment was also found in street vendors' offerings. Lemonade sellers, with their bright glass bottles, offered cool relief in summer. Stalls sold warm drinks of coffee or cocoa in winter, their steam rising into the frosty night air. Children cherished penny ices, flavored with fruit syrups, their tongues stained bright colors. These small indulgences, bought at corners and markets, brought delight to ordinary days. In wealthier homes, refreshments became part of social ritual. Afternoon tea was an event, with lace tablecloths, silver teapots, and tiered trays of delicacies. Guests lingered for hours, sipping slowly, exchanging news, and savoring cakes iced with care. Evenings brought wine or sherry, poured in crystal glasses during quiet gatherings. Imagine the glow of candlelight on polished wood, the gentle chime of a glass being set down, the hum of voices softened by civility. Here, drink was not only refreshment, but a language of hospitality. In contrast, a simple mug of ale in a crowded tavern spoke of a different kind of fellowship, louder, warmer, more immediate. The contrast between these two worlds, refined and humble, showed once again the vast spectrum of Victorian life. And yet, whether in porcelain cups or chipped mugs, the act of sharing a drink bound people together, creating moments of pause in a restless city. In a moment, we will step into the world of fashion and clothing, exploring how Londoners dressed and how garments shaped daily life. But before we move onward, let us pause here with our cups still warm in hand. Imagine the soft comfort of tea sipped slowly after work, the lively clatter of mugs in a pub, the murmur of conversation in a coffee house, the cheerful call of a lemonade vendor in the street. These are the sounds and scents of refreshment, woven gently into the fabric of the city. So as you rest tonight, picture the steam rising from a pot of tea, the glow of lamplight on amber ale, the faint aroma of roasted beans. Let these small comforts linger with you, as timeless as they are soothing, carrying you softly toward dreams. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the warmth of a cup, simple, steady, shared, settle into your hands, easing you into peaceful rest. Every street of Victorian London was a moving gallery of fabrics and forms. Clothing, whether fine or humble, revealed much about a person's place in society, their work, their means, even their aspirations. Tonight, let us wander gently through the wardrobes of the city, imagining the rustle of silk skirts, the creak of leather boots, the swish of aprons, and the comfort of shawls wrapped against the chill. Begin with the elegance of the wealthy, whose fashions changed with each season. Ladies in the West End wore gowns of silk and satin, their skirts supported by crinolines or bustles that swept wide behind them. Ribbons and lace-adorned bodices, while gloves covered hands even in summer. Bonnets framed faces delicately, trimmed with feathers, flowers, or velvet ribbons. Imagine the soft rustle as such a lady crossed a drawing room, her skirts brushing against carpets, the faint scent of perfume lingering in her wake. To be dressed in such fashion was not only to be clothed, but to be arranged. A careful composition of fabrics, colors, and textures, each detail proclaiming refinement. Gentlemen, too, wore their place upon their sleeves. Frock coats, waistcoats, and cravats formed the daily uniform of the respectable. Top hats gleamed with polish, while polished boots clicked smartly against pavements. For formal occasions, tailcoats and gloves completed the ensemble, while for leisure, straw boaters or felt hats softened the look. A gentleman's watch chain might glint from his waistcoat pocket, a quiet signal of punctuality and status. Imagine the steady tap of a walking stick, the careful adjustment of a hat brim, each movement performed with dignity, each garment designed to suggest restraint and propriety. Yet beyond these polished avenues, the city wore other clothes. Working men dressed in sturdy garments, shirts rolled at the sleeves, woolen trousers, waistcoats faded by use, caps pulled low against the weather. Their boots were thick-soled, scuffed by labor, often patched many times over. A dock worker's jacket smelled faintly of tar and rope. Carpenters carried the scent of wood shavings. Their clothing was practical, built for wear, and though it lacked elegance, it bore the marks of honest toil. Imagine the creak of leather straps, the weight of tools carried in belts, the soft rasp of wool brushed by daily work. Women of the working classes, dressed in simpler fabrics, cotton, wool and calico, often layered with aprons to protect against dirt. Shawls heavy and comforting, wrapped around shoulders in cold weather, their ends tucked neatly as women carried baskets or pushed barrows. Bonnets were worn, but often plain and serviceable, trimmed only modestly. Even in hardship, women took care with what they wore, for clothing offered dignity, a sense of self carried proudly through crowded streets. A neatly tied apron or a carefully folded shawl could bring a quiet grace to the humblest outfit. Children's clothes, too, told their own stories. In wealthier homes, little boys wore sailor suits or tailored jackets, while girls dressed in frocks with pinafores and ribbons in their hair. In poorer families, garments were often patched and handed down from older siblings, worn until the fabric thinned and seams strained. Shoes, if they were owned at all, might be outgrown before they could be replaced. And yet, children still found ways to take pride in a bow tied neatly, or a cap worn jauntily, carrying their own spark of individuality within the limits of what they had. Uniforms added another layer to London's clothing. Policemen in their dark coats and helmets, postmen in red, soldiers in smart regimental dress. Each was a familiar sight, their attire marking duty and belonging. Servants wore livery in grand households, their neat uniforms part of the display of status. Even the aprons of maids and the caps of nurses carried meaning, identifying roles with clarity. These uniforms gave order to the city, a language of cloth understood at a glance. Fashion was also shaped by industry. With the growth of textile factories and new dyes, fabrics became more varied and affordable. Bright colors, once reserved for the wealthy, appeared on the skirts of shopgirls and seamstresses, bringing cheer into crowded streets. Magazines and shop windows displayed the latest fashions, and even those who could not afford them might imitate styles in simpler cloth, adapting the city's elegance to their own means. Imagine a young seamstress lingering before a shop window, studying the lines of a gown, then returning home to stitch a modest version for herself. In such ways, fashion trickled through every layer of society. Seasonal change shaped clothing as well. In winter, heavy cloaks, mufflers, and fur-trimmed garments kept the damp cold at bay. In summer, lighter cottons and linens brought relief from the heat. Umbrellas were constant companions in the unpredictable London weather, their canopies blooming suddenly on a rainy day, turning streets into a sea of black silk domes. Imagine the gentle patter of rain against them, the soft shake of droplets as they were folded once more in a moment. We will step into the quieter rituals of the household, where garments were mended, washed, and cared for. But before we leave the streets, let us linger in this gallery of fabrics. Picture a lady in silk passing a costermonger in wool, a gentleman in a polished top hat tipping it to a seamstress in her shawl, a group of children skipping together, their pinafores and patched trousers fluttering in play. Each garment, humble or grand, was part of London's great tapestry, a language of cloth that spoke without words. So as you rest tonight, imagine the rustle of skirts, the creak of boots, the soft warmth of a shawl drawn close. These are the textures of Victorian life, woven not only from fabric, but from pride, duty, and care now, as you drift further into sleep. Let the gentle swish of cloth and the quiet tap of polished boots fade softly, carrying you into dreams like fabric folding neatly into drawers every garment that appeared in the streets of Victorian London, whether a silk gown rustling in a carriage or a patched apron, worn in a market, carried with it hours of unseen labor. Behind each button, each fold of cloth, each crease smoothed by an iron, lay the work of laundresses, seamstresses, and housewives whose daily rhythms revolved around the care of clothing. Tonight, let us wander softly into that domestic world, where washing, mending, and sewing unfolded like rituals, steady and familiar. Imagine first the weekly wash day, often dreaded for its toil. In small yards or washhouses, copper tubs were filled with steaming water, stirred by wooden paddles until clothes swirled and hissed. The air was heavy with the scent of soap and damp linen, the steam rising in clouds that clung to walls and windows. Women worked with sleeves rolled high, their hands reddened by heat and scrubbing, their arms weary from lifting sodden fabric. Shirts, sheets, stockings, and aprons were beaten clean against washboards, then wrung tightly before being hung to dry. Lines stretched across backyards, yards turned into forests of fluttering cloth, garments swaying in the wind like sails at harbor. Ironing followed, with heavy flat irons heated on stoves. The hiss of hot metal meeting damp fabric filled the air, a steady rhythm of pressing and smoothing. Each shirt front was made crisp, each collar carefully folded, each sheet pressed until it lay flat as new. Imagine the satisfaction of lifting a neatly pressed garment, warm in the hands, the day's effort visible in its smooth lines. Though washing days were hard, they carried their own rhythm of accomplishment, a sense that order had been restored through patience and labor. Mending was another constant companion. Few garments were ever discarded quickly. Instead, they were patched, darned, and stitched until fabric nearly gave way. Stockings were carefully darned at the heel, trousers patched at the knee, shirts reinforced at the elbow. Women worked with small sewing baskets beside them, needles glinting as they slipped through cloth. Children's clothes were most often handed down, stitched anew to fit smaller bodies. Imagine a mother seated by the fire, her children playing softly nearby, her fingers steady as she repairs a tear, giving new life to a garment that might serve another season. Each stitch was both necessity and care, a quiet act of love folded into the fabric itself. Seamstresses and tailors filled the city, their trade vital to every class. In small workshops, seamstresses bent over tables, cutting and stitching garments for shops or for private customers. Their work was steady, often long into the night, their eyes strained by lamplight, their fingers nimble with thread. Tailors measured and cut cloth with precision, shaping suits that lent dignity to clerks, merchants, and gentlemen alike. Milliners trimmed bonnets with feathers and ribbons, their creations brightening the streets with color and grace. These trades were demanding, but they also brought artistry into daily life. Each garment a careful blend of necessity and beauty. In grander households, laundry and sewing were managed by servants. Maids carried baskets of linen to washhouses, while ladies' maids mended gowns, replaced ribbons, and ensured their mistresses' wardrobes were always in perfect order. To serve in such a role required skill as well as discretion. A well-mended gown or a neatly pressed collar reflected not only on the wearer, but also on the unseen hands that had prepared it. Imagine the hush of a servant's room, the soft scrape of scissors, the gentle hum of a needle pulling through fabric, a world of labor carried out quietly. diligently, without fanfare. For the poor, the care of clothing was harder, yet no less important. Washing might be done in shared yards, with water hauled by bucket from pumps. Drying meant draping garments over fences or laying them across hedges. Mending was constant, each scrap of cloth saved for patches, each piece of thread used until it frayed. Even the humblest family strove to keep their clothing presentable, for appearance carried dignity, and in a city where judgments were swift, a neat shirt or a clean apron could mean respect. Second-hand clothing shops thrived, offering garments worn by others but still useful. These shops, with racks of coats, boots, and dresses, allowed even the poorest to find clothing, though often in mismatched or faded styles. Imagine stepping inside such a shop, running fingers along a row of jackets, hoping to find one that fit, one that might keep out the cold. In this way, garments lived many lives, passing from hand to hand, stitched and restitched, worn until the fabric itself seemed to hold the memory of those who had carried it before. Clothing, then, was not only fabric. It was a story of care. Each garment bore the imprint of labor, the scrub of washboards, the hiss of irons, the prick of needles, the steady patience of hands. To walk the streets of London was to see not only fashion, but also the invisible work that sustained it. The countless hours folded silently into every seam in a moment. We will leave these domestic rhythms to wander into the world of travel and transport, the carriages, omnibuses, and railways that carried Londoners through their days. But before we move forward, let us pause with this image. A row of shirts drying in the wind, a shawl folded neatly on a chair, a stocking darned with care. These are the small acts that shaped daily life, humble yet full of meaning. The quiet industry that made a city clothed and whole. So, as you rest tonight, imagine the soft warmth of linen fresh from the iron, the rhythmic sound of a needle stitching steadily, the gentle sway of clean garments drying in the breeze. These are the soothing rhythms of care, patient and timeless now. As you drift further into sleep, let the scent of soap and the softness of fabric surround you like a blanket, wrapping you in calm and comfort. Asterisk, a city as vast as Victorian London was always in motion. Its streets rang with the clatter of hooves, the rattle of wheels, and the endless hum of footsteps. To move through the city was to feel its pulse, to sense the flow of people, goods, and stories carried from one quarter to another. Tonight, let us wander gently into the world of travel and transport, imagining the carriages, omnibuses, hansom cabs, and railways that shaped the rhythms of daily life. Begin with the carriages that filled the West End, polished and stately. Imagine glossy horses pulling elegant landaus and brooms, their wheels rolling smoothly across the cobblestones. Inside, ladies in silks and gentlemen in frock coats sat in comfort, speaking softly as they passed along broad avenues lined with lamps. A liveried coachman held the reins with steady hands, while a groom sat behind, ready to leap down at the first stop. The air carried the scent of leather and horse, the faint jingling of harness bells, the steady rhythm of hooves striking stone. To see such a carriage glide by was to glimpse refinement, the outward sign of wealth moving gracefully through the city. Yet alongside these polished vehicles came the omnibuses, sturdy and practical. Picture a large, box-like coach painted in bright colors, drawn by 2 horses, carrying passengers both inside and on its roof. Conductors called out destinations as the omnibus rattled along fixed routes, stopping to gather clerks, shopgirls, and laborers. Those who climbed to the roof held tight against wind and rain. Yet, for the price of a few pence, they were carried swiftly across the sprawling city. The omnibus was the great equalizer, making movement affordable, connecting neighborhoods, and filling the streets with a constant rumble of wheels. More nimble than either carriage or omnibus was the hansom cab, the swift two-wheeled vehicle that became a symbol of London life. Imagine the driver perched high behind, reins in hand, while the passenger sat enclosed below, shielded from weather by a small folding hood. The hansom darted through traffic with surprising speed, its wheels light, its turns sharp. For those in a hurry, businessmen late for meetings, couples heading to the theatre, the hansom was indispensable. Its very sound, the quick clop of hooves, the brisk roll of narrow wheels, spoke of urgency and energy, of a city always on the move. Beyond these, countless smaller vehicles filled the streets. Delivery carts carried bread, milk, and coal. Dust carts trundled slowly, collecting refuse. Tradesmen's wagons bore signs painted with their names, moving steadily from house to house. Each added its own note to the chorus of wheels and hooves, a constant background to daily life. And then, beyond the crowded streets, came the railways, reshaping not only travel but time itself. The great stations, Euston, Paddington, King's Cross, and more, stood like temples of iron and glass, their vast roofs arching over platforms filled with steam and sound. Imagine the hiss of engines, the clank of couplings, the call of porters as they hurried with luggage. Passengers climbed into carriages lined with wood and brass, settling into seats as whistles blew. The train lurched forward, wheels clattering on rails, carrying Londoners out to suburbs, to seaside towns, to distant cities that suddenly seemed closer than ever before. For commuters, the railways brought a new rhythm to life. Men travelled daily from the growing suburbs, leaving in the morning and returning at night, their schedules measured by timetables and whistles. Families took excursions on weekends, children pressing their noses to windows as the countryside rushed past. The railway was progress made visible, its speed and power reshaping the very way people imagined distance and time. Yet many still walked, for walking was the most reliable form of travel of all. Across bridges, down alleys, along crowded pavements, the steady tramp of feet filled every hour. Clerks walked to offices, maids to markets, children to schools. A stroll through a park or along the river was as much leisure as it was transport, the slow rhythm of footsteps carrying thoughts as well as bodies. Imagine the quiet pleasure of a walk beneath plane trees, the rustle of skirts or the swing of a cane, the simple movement forward that belonged to everyone. Rich or poor, the sounds of travel blended into the city's lullaby. The clop of hooves, the creak of harness, the rattle of wheels, the hiss of steam, the steady beat of footsteps, each sound distinct, yet together forming the music of motion. To close one's eyes in London was to hear this ceaseless rhythm, carrying on by day and night, never entirely still in a moment. We will step into the world of communication, the letters, newspapers, and telegraphs that carried words as swiftly as carriages carried bodies. But before we leave these streets and stations, let us pause to rest in their steady movement. Imagine yourself seated in a hansom cab as it darts through the lamplight, or standing on a platform as a great engine shudders to life, or simply walking home through quiet lanes at dusk. These are the rhythms of Victorian travel, carrying lives forward, always onward. So, as you rest tonight, Let the gentle roll of wheels, the echo of hooves, and the soft hush of footsteps accompany you, steady and calm, like the heartbeat of a city in motion now. As you drift further into sleep, feel yourself carried along these rhythms, smoothly, steadily, without hurry, toward dreams as wide as the city itself. Asterisk if the carriages, omnibuses, and trains carried people across London, then letters, newspapers, and telegraphs carried thoughts. The city lived not only on movement, but on words. Words that arrived folded in envelopes. Words printed in inky type. Words flashed across wires in bursts of electricity. Tonight, let us wander softly into this world of communication, where the written and spoken word bound together lives across distance. Begin with letters, the most personal of all. Imagine a small writing desk by a window, a sheet of cream paper laid out, an ink bottle open, a pen poised. A young woman dips her nib, and with steady strokes begins to write news of health, of family, of little events that fill the hours. Each word carries care, each line a thread of connection stretched across the city or across the sea. When the letter is sealed with wax and placed in an envelope, it becomes more than paper. It becomes a voice, folded and waiting to be heard. The postal system in Victorian London was vast and efficient. Its red pillar boxes and uniformed postmen familiar sights in every street. Imagine a postman striding with purpose, his satchel heavy with letters, his boots clicking on the pavement as he passed from house to house. The knock at a door brought both anticipation and routine, for letters were not rare. They arrived daily, sometimes several times a day. Lovers, families, friends, and business partners alike depended on this steady rhythm of communication. The post connected not only households, but also hearts, binding the city in a web of ink and paper. Newspapers added another layer, spreading news to thousands at once. In the mornings, vendors stood on corners, calling out the day's headlines, their voices rising above the clatter of streets. Imagine unfolding a fresh sheet, the paper smelling faintly of ink, the type crisp, the columns dense with reports. Here were accounts of Parliament, news from the Empire, stories of invention, theatre reviews, even serialized novels that readers awaited with eagerness week by week. Families gathered to read aloud by the fire, neighbors discussed articles in pubs, and clerks folded papers neatly into pockets to read on their commutes. The newspaper was both mirror and messenger, reflecting the city back to itself, shaping conversations that carried through the day. Asterisk the telegraph, newer and swifter, added urgency to communication. In offices filled with wires and clicking instruments, operators translated messages into dots and dashes, sending them racing across miles of cable. Imagine the quick, sharp sound of keys being tapped, the faint tremor of wires overhead, the remarkable swiftness with which news could travel. A message that once took days by letter could now arrive in hours. For businesses, the telegraph meant decisions made faster. For families, it meant news of loved ones could arrive almost at once. Though the telegraph lacked the warmth of a letter, it carried a power of immediacy, a sense of the world shrinking into closer bonds. Communication was also a social ritual. In drawing rooms, visiting cards were left as tokens of presence, small rectangles of pasteboard bearing a name, often delivered by footmen or slipped through letterbox. To leave a card was to signal connection, to say without words, "I was here, I thought of you." Imagine a silver tray in a hallway, stacked with cards from friends, neighbors, acquaintances, each one a silent note in the symphony of social life. For children, the arrival of the post was a small wonder. Imagine a child running to the door at the sound of a knock, eyes wide as a letter was handed over. The thrill of tearing open an envelope, of seeing handwriting familiar and beloved, carried joy that lingered long after the words were read. In these small moments, communication was not only practical but magical proof that voices could travel unseen, arriving like gifts, yet words also filled the streets themselves. Posters were pasted to walls, announcing lectures, plays, and political meetings. Handbills fluttered into hands, advertising goods, services, and events. Shop signs hung above doorways, their painted letters guiding passers-by. The city was a forest of words, printed, written, shouted, whispered, a constant chorus of communication that wrapped itself around daily life. In a moment, we will step into the world of leisure reading and storytelling, the novels, magazines, and tales that filled quieter hours. But before we leave, let us linger with the image of communication itself. Picture a letter being opened by candlelight, the words read slowly, cherished. Picture a family sharing the newspaper in the evening, voices taking turns. Picture the faint tapping of telegraph keys in a distant office, sending messages racing across wires. These were the voices of the city, carrying thoughts across distance, shaping the fabric of connection. So as you rest tonight, imagine the sound of paper unfolding, the soft scratch of pen on parchment, the faint click of keys in a telegraph office. Let these gentle rhythms remind you that words, like footsteps, carried people closer, weaving lives together. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the hush of written words settle softly around you, like a lullaby whispered from afar. Asterisk, when the bustle of the day slowed, when lamps were lit and the fire glowed gently in the hearth, many Londoners turned to the quiet company of books, papers, and magazines. Reading was not only a pastime, it was a doorway into other worlds, a way to travel without leaving home, to dream while awake. Tonight, let us wander softly into this world of leisure, reading, and storytelling, where pages turned slowly and imaginations drifted far beyond the city's fog. Imagine first the family gathered in a parlor, the father holding a newspaper, his voice steady as he read aloud the day's reports. Children listened with wide eyes to stories of ships crossing oceans, of Parliament's debates, of discoveries in distant lands. The mother, perhaps, followed with a chapter from a novel serialized in the evening paper, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the tale. The room was quiet but for these voices, the crackle of the fire, and the occasional creak of a chair. Such evenings were common in middle-class homes, where reading was a shared experience, weaving together the bonds of family through words. For those who read alone, novels provided companionship. Picture a young woman in a modest room, a candle at her side, turning the pages of a story by Charles Dickens or Wilkie Collins. The characters came alive before her, their voices mingling with her own thoughts, their struggles and triumphs brightening her own quiet hours. Serialized fiction meant that novels were experienced in parts, chapters eagerly awaited week by week. Each new installment was like a visit from an old friend, arriving with the post or tucked within a newspaper. Magazines added variety to reading life. Illustrated journals, with their engravings of fashion, travel, and household advice, filled parlors with conversation. Penny magazines offered stories, puzzles, and articles that could be bought cheaply. Their pages passed from hand to hand, Imagine a group of seamstresses in a workshop, pausing in their stitching to listen as one read aloud from a magazine, their laughter filling the room at a comic tale, their curiosity piqued by a description of distant lands. These small, affordable publications spread knowledge and amusement widely, carrying imagination into homes that might otherwise have little luxury. Libraries, too, opened the world of reading to many. Circulating libraries allowed members to borrow books for a modest fee, while charitable institutions created reading rooms where newspapers and volumes could be shared freely. Imagine stepping into such a room, the quiet shuffle of chairs, the soft turning of pages, the smell of ink and leather binding in the air. Here clerks, shopkeepers, and apprentices found themselves transported into worlds of history, science, and fiction, their minds expanding even as their bodies remained within the city. Children's reading carried its own magic. Picture a child curled up by the fire, holding a book of fairy tales, the illustrations glowing in the lamplight. Stories of giants, fairies, and enchanted forests mingled with the real fog of London outside the window, filling young minds with wonder. Schoolbooks, too, found their place, teaching letters, numbers, and moral lessons. But it was the tales of adventure, pirates, explorers, daring heroes, that children remembered longest. Their dreams filled with voyages to faraway places. The act of reading itself carried comfort. The soft feel of a page beneath the fingers, the gentle weight of a book resting on the lap, the steady rhythm of eyes moving line by line, all created a kind of peace, a slowing of the day's rush. For many, reading was as much rest as recreation, a moment of stillness amid the constant hum of the city. Imagine a tired clerk, his day finished, sinking into a chair with a borrowed novel. His mind carried far from ledgers and ink into landscapes of imagination. Storytelling did not always need books. In taverns, in kitchens, and at firesides, tales were still told aloud. Neighbors shared anecdotes. Workers swapped stories on breaks. Families passed down folk tales from one generation to another. The spoken word, full of humor, warmth, and rhythm, kept alive traditions that no printing press could capture. Imagine a grandmother telling a tale to children at bedtime, her voice low and soothing, the story winding gently toward dreams. In these spoken stories, as in books, imagination bridged the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Asterisk reading also became a marker of aspiration. To own books was a sign of learning and respectability. To read them was to join a world of ideas. Even in the poorest neighborhoods, penny papers and serialized novels meant that stories could reach those with little money to spare. The hunger for words was strong, the love of stories universal. In quiet moments, Londoners, whether rich or poor, found in reading the same comfort, a gentle escape, a window into wider worlds. In a moment, we will move from imagination into sound, into the world of music, song, and the instruments that filled parlors and streets alike. But before we leave these pages, let us pause to linger in their stillness. Picture yourself seated by a fire, a book open before you, the quiet rustle of its pages, the only sound. Outside, the city hums, but within, all is calm. All is carried by words, so as you rest tonight, imagine the comfort of a favorite story, the steady voice of a parent reading aloud, the hush of a library filled with books. These are the gentle rhythms of imagination, timeless and soothing now. As you drift further into sleep, let the quiet turning of pages carry you softly, like footsteps into dreams. Asterisk, if words gave London its voice, then music gave it its soul. In Victorian times, melodies drifted through drawing rooms, echoed in chapels, and spilled out onto the streets from fiddlers and organ grinders. Some music was polished, precise, and written on sheets of fine paper. Some was rough, spontaneous, carried by memory alone. Yet all of it, from the grandest concert hall to the humblest alley, brought comfort, joy, and a gentle sense of rhythm to daily life. Tonight, let us wander softly through this soundscape, pausing to hear its notes begin in the parlor of a respectable home where the upright piano had become a fixture. Imagine the polished wood gleaming in lamplight, the keys white beneath the fingers of a daughter or mother who played softly in the evenings. Simple tunes, ballads, or popular songs filled the room, the music mingling with the crackle of the fire. Guests gathered close, humming along, or perhaps joining in a song as the pianist smiled shyly. In homes such as these, music was not performance, but companionship, a way to share the quiet pleasure of sound together. Songs traveled quickly through the city. A ballad introduced in a theater might soon be heard in a drawing room, hummed in a workshop, or whistled by a boy in the street. Imagine walking along a lane and hearing the same melody in many voices, each carrying it in their own way. Music was a thread that tied together high and low, polished and humble, all humming with the same tune. Asterisk churches and chapels added their own solemn music. Choirs lifted hymns that filled lofty spaces with harmony, voices blending in reverence. The swell of the organ added depth, its notes rolling like waves, echoing against stone walls. For many Londoners, these hymns were as familiar as breathing. Their words and melodies learned in childhood carried through life like companions. To sit in a pew, hearing voices rise around you, was to feel part of something larger, something steady and comforting. On the streets, the music was livelier, rougher, yet no less dear. Organ grinders turned handles on their barrel organs, filling alleys with jaunty tunes. Children danced and clapped, their laughter bright against the melody. Fiddlers, flutists, and singers performed at corners, hats laid out for coins. Their songs told stories, comic, tragic, or simply merry, and their presence brought cheer to busy markets and weary passers-by. Imagine pausing in the dusk to hear a fiddler's bow scrape out a lively jig, neighbors swaying gently, smiles forming despite the day's fatigue. Theaters and music halls carried music to wider audiences. Inside, voices rang out in comic songs, ballads, and choruses that the audience joined in with gusto. The sound was less about polish and more about togetherness. Hundreds of voices rising as one, echoing against walls thick with smoke. Imagine the joy of singing along, of feeling the floor vibrate beneath stamping feet, of laughter carried on the melody. These evenings were not quiet, but they were deeply human, filled with the warmth of shared sound. In wealthier circles, concerts and operas filled the evenings. Imagine the hush as an orchestra tuned, the soft ripple of anticipation before the first note. Violins rose, cellos answered, horns swelled, and the hall filled with music grander than any one instrument alone. Opera singers lifted their voices to heights that seemed to shimmer in the air, carrying audiences into realms of emotion and beauty. These performances were spectacles, but they were also shared dreams, a reminder that music could carry hearts far beyond the walls of a hall. Even in workplaces, music found its place. Women sang as they sewed, their voices keeping time with needle and thread. Men hummed as they hammered or sawed, their tunes steady as the rhythm of labor. Songs lightened the hours, made heavy work bearable, and kept spirits afloat. Imagine a workshop filled with the hum of sewing machines, punctuated by laughter and a chorus of voices singing the refrain of a familiar song, Children. Two filled streets and yards with music of their own, skipping songs. Nursery rhymes, chants that echoed as they played. Their voices rose and fell like waves, carrying simple melodies that seemed to weave joy into the very stones beneath their feet. These songs, passed from one child to another, carried memories of childhood long after the voices themselves grew quiet in a moment. We will step into the world of night and illumination, where gas lamps glowed and the city shifted into evening rhythms. But before we move onward, let us pause here with the sounds of music still lingering. Imagine the soft chords of a piano in a parlor, the swell of an organ in a chapel, the cheerful scrape of a fiddle in the street, the roar of a music hall chorus. These were the voices of Victorian London, not spoken but sung, weaving harmony through a restless city. So as you rest tonight, imagine a melody drifting softly through an open window, a lullaby carried on evening air, soothing as it fades into distance. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the music of the city, gentle, warm, timeless, carry you softly, like a song without end, into dreams, as the sun dipped beyond the rooftops and the sky turned from gold to indigo. Victorian London changed its face. The clamour of daytime softened, the pace slowed, and the city slipped into its nighttime rhythms. Tonight, let us wander gently through the lamplit streets, imagining the glow, the hush, and the secret life of London after dark. The first sign of evening was the lighting of the lamps. Before electricity, the city glowed with gas, each lamp lit by hand. Imagine the lamplighter moving steadily from post to post, his ladder carried on his shoulder, his pole reaching up to coax each flame to life. One by one, the lamps flickered into brightness, their halos softening the darkness, casting long shadows across cobblestones. In narrow lanes, the glow was faint and uneven, but in grand boulevards, rows of lamps created golden rivers of light, leading carriages and pedestrians into the night. Shops and taverns brightened as well, their windows glowing warmly, drawing people inward. Bakeries displayed loaves still warm from the oven, their scent carrying into the street. Pubs spilled laughter and song through open doors, while tea shops offered a quieter refuge, their tables filled with late customers lingering over cups. The city's heart still beat, but with a gentler rhythm, less rush, more pause. As workers returned home and families gathered for supper, evening strolls became a beloved pastime. In parks and squares, couples walked arm in arm, their footsteps slow, their voices low. Children skipped along paths, chasing one another in the fading light before being called home. The air was cooler, carrying the faint perfume of flowers in summer, or the crisp scent of frost in winter. Imagine yourself walking slowly beneath rows of trees, their branches swaying softly against the glow of lamps. The bustle of the day far behind you. Theatres and music halls drew crowds in the evening hours, their doors spilling patrons onto the streets. Carriages lined up outside, footmen helping ladies down, while vendors sold oranges and sweets to those heading in. Inside, the air was alive with music, laughter, and applause. But outside, the streets carried their own quiet drama, the flicker of torches, the shuffle of expectant crowds, the anticipation of a night's amusement. For many, though evenings meant home. Families gathered in parlors, lamps lit, fires burning low. Supper was eaten slowly, followed by quiet conversation, reading aloud, or the soft strains of a piano. Children were tucked into bed, lullabies sung, while parents sat together, savoring the stillness after the day's labors. Imagine the glow of a single lamp casting light on a family's faces. The sense of safety and warmth enclosed within walls. While outside the city hummed on, the night also held its workers, cab drivers guiding hansoms through the streets, policemen patrolling their beats, printers laboring at presses that would deliver morning papers. Market traders prepared their stalls for the dawn, bakers kneaded dough, and dock workers unloaded ships even beneath the stars. London never truly slept. It only shifted, handing the hours from one set of workers to another in poorer districts. Evenings carried both hardship and resilience. Families crowded into small rooms, their meals simple but shared. Neighbors gathered outside doorways, chatting in low voices, watching the children play a little longer before night fell fully. Songs were sung, jokes exchanged, even amid the weariness of the day. The glow of a candle in a window, the sound of laughter in an alley, spoke of endurance, of warmth carved out of difficulty. The River Thames at night was its own vision. Barges floated silently, their shapes dark against the water's shimmer. Gas lamps on bridges cast reflections that rippled like golden ribbons across the surface. The tide whispered against embankments, carrying the city's breath with it. Standing at the water's edge, one could feel both the immensity of London and its hush, as if the river itself was cradling the city into slumber. Night carried secrets, too. In its shadows, lovers met quietly, while stories unfolded unseen. The contrast between light and dark gave the city a dreamlike quality, where every flickering lamp seemed a guardian against mystery. Imagine pausing beneath one such lamp, listening to the faint echoes of distant carriages, feeling the cool air on your face, the night wrapping softly around you. In a moment, we will step into the final rhythms of rest, the ways Londoners prepared for sleep, the quiet rituals of ending the day. But before we leave, let us pause in the glow of gaslight at the threshold between bustle and rest. Picture the lamplighter finishing his rounds, the city glowing softly in his wake. Picture a family by their fire, children drifting into dreams as their parents watch over them. Picture the Thames shimmering, the lamps reflecting gently on its surface. So, as you rest tonight, imagine yourself walking slowly through these lamplit streets, each step lighter, each sound softer, until the city itself seems to hush around you. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the glow of the lamps guide you, steady and warm, into dreams as gentle as the London night, every day, no matter how busy or burdensome, reached its end. And in Victorian London, as in every city across time, people had their ways of settling into the night. The clamour of carriages faded, the hum of markets stilled, and the city itself seemed to breathe more slowly. Tonight, let us wander quietly through these closing rituals, the bedrooms, the lullabies, the dreams that brought each London day to its gentle conclusion. Imagine first the wealthier homes, their tall windows drawn with heavy drapes. Servants moved softly through hallways, turning down beds, lighting small lamps, and laying out nightclothes. Bedrooms here were sanctuaries, with canopied beds piled with pillows, dressing tables neat with brushes and mirrors, and fires glowing faintly in the hearth. A lady might unpin her hair, letting it fall in waves as her maid brushed it smooth. A gentleman might loosen his cravat, slip into a robe, and settle into a chair with a final page of reading before retiring. The house grew still, each chamber a quiet cocoon, the sounds of the city outside muffled by layers of fabric and stone. In middle-class households, the rituals were simpler but no less cherished. Children were tucked beneath quilts, their prayers whispered softly at bedsides. Mothers kissed brows, fathers checked windows, lamps were dimmed, and the soft creak of stairs marked the settling of the house. Bedrooms held modest bedsteads, washstands with pitchers and basins, perhaps a small shelf of books or a treasured keepsake on a table. The comfort was not in luxury, but in routine, in the sense that each night closed with order, with warmth, with the security of family gathered under one roof. For the working poor, rest was harder to find. Families often shared a single room, beds crowded or even shared by several children at once. Yet even here, rituals brought comfort. A candle flickered low, shadows dancing gently on walls. A lullaby might be sung, soft, steady, carrying children into dreams despite hunger or cold. Neighbors quieted their talk, doorways closed, and the street itself seemed to hush as night deepened. The bed might be hard, the coverings thin, but the simple act of lying down, of closing weary eyes, carried its own relief. Sleep was a universal equalizer, and the sounds of rest were the same across class and circumstance. The sigh of a child drifting off, the soft creak of a bedstead, the whisper of blankets pulled close. In every home, from grand townhouse to humble court, night carried its blanket of silence, wrapping the city in calm. London at rest was not silent, but its sounds were gentler. The clip of a late cab echoed faintly, fading quickly into distance. The cry of a night watchman, the bark of a dog, the far-off whistle of a train, all softened by the hush of sleep. Even the river moved more quietly, its tide lapping with steady rhythm, as if soothing the city in its slumber. Dreams, too, played their part in this nightly rhythm. A seamstress might dream of gowns finer than any she had sewn, her mind carrying her into ballrooms lit by chandeliers. A clerk might dream of ledgers that turned into maps, guiding him to far-off lands he had only read about. Children dreamed of games, of fairy tales, of skies without soot, their imaginations soaring beyond the narrowness of alleys. Dreams were the city's secret life, invisible but essential, a place where hardship and grandeur mingled freely. The rituals of waking would come soon enough, dawn breaking, fires being stoked, footsteps returning to the streets. But for now, the city rested. Its millions lay in beds, on straw pallets, or even on benches, each one surrendering to the same gentle rhythm of sleep. For a few hours, London itself seemed to exhale, to lay down its burdens, to become a softer place. In a moment, we will close this journey through Victorian London, gathering the threads of daily life into one gentle tapestry. But before we leave, let us linger here in the stillness of night. Picture a child curled beneath a quilt, her breathing soft. Picture a lamplighter returning home, his work done, his boots set aside by the door. Picture the glow of a single candle snuffed, leaving a room in darkness. The hush of rest settling like a blessing. So, as you rest tonight, imagine yourself lying in one of these rooms, the air faintly scented with soap or coal smoke, the blanket pulled close, the city outside fading into silence. Let the steady rhythm of sleep carry you, just as it carried millions of Londoners before you. into dreams as timeless as night itself. Now, as you drift further into sleep, let the hush of the Victorian night calm, steady, and full of rest, wrap you like a quilt, guiding you softly into your own dreams. Asterisk, and now, dear listener, we come to the quiet end of our journey. We have wandered together through the misty mornings and glowing evenings of Victorian London, walked its bustling markets and silent alleys, tasted its bread and tea, listened to its songs and stories. We have seen how the city lived and breathed, how its people, rich and poor alike, carried on with dignity, with weariness, with laughter, with love. Tonight, let us gather these threads gently, weaving them into a single tapestry of memory and rest. Think first of the dawn, the streets damp with fog, the sound of footsteps on cobblestones, the call of a milkman or the creak of a cart. The city waking slowly, stretching into life, the chimneys exhaling their first plumes of smoke. Imagine standing there, wrapped in a shawl, watching London come alive, each breath of morning air cool and fresh. That was the beginning of each day, a rhythm as steady as the tide. Then the hours of labor, so many and so varied. Clerks bent over ledgers in offices smelling of ink and paper. Seamstresses stitching beneath the dim glow of lamps. Dock workers hauling ropes and crates, their muscles straining, their voices rising in chorus. And alongside them, the quiet persistence of maids sweeping floors, cooks stirring pots, shoeblacks polishing boots until they shone. Each task small in itself, yet together they built the hum of a city, a great symphony of work that sustained the whole. But life was not only toil. There were parks where children played, paths where couples strolled, libraries where readers lost themselves in stories. There were songs sung in parlors, fiddles played in alleys, ballads echoed in music halls. There were evenings of laughter in taverns, afternoons of quiet tea with friends, mornings of hope in markets overflowing with produce. The city carried joy alongside struggle, beauty alongside hardship, and it was this balance that made it so deeply human. The West End shone with elegance, carriages gliding beneath gas lamps, theatres glittering with music and finery. The East End pulsed with resilience, markets alive with noise, neighbours sharing bread and stories, children's games echoing between narrow walls. Both belonged to London, both gave it its character. Both spoke of lives lived fully, each in their own way. We walked together through the hidden corners, the alleys and courts where daily life unfolded unseen by the wider world. We watched laundry fluttering like sails, heard the laughter of children skipping ropes, smelled the steam of stew simmering slowly. These corners may have been small, but they were the heartbeats of the city, steady and enduring. We stepped onto carriages and omnibuses, into hansom cabs darting quickly through lamplit streets, onto trains rushing outward into the countryside. We felt the motion of a city always on the move, its people carried forward by wheels, by hooves, by the hiss of steam. And alongside that movement came words, letters folded with care, newspapers crinkling in eager hands, telegraph wires humming with news. London was never silent, never still, for its people and its words flowed endlessly. And then, as evening fell, the city softened. Gas lamps flickered into glow, families gathered at tables, laughter and songs drifted from taverns, music rose in theatres. The Thames shimmered with reflections, bridges gleamed like ribbons of gold, and the hush of night descended at last. Bedrooms filled with the whispers of bedtime prayers, the soft sighs of children sleeping, the creak of bedsteads, the lull of dreams. London, so vast and restless, rested at last beneath its quilt of night. What, then, remains with us as we take leave of this city of another age? Perhaps it is the sense of rhythm, the steady pulse of days that begin with fog and end with lamplight, the pattern of work and rest, of noise and stillness. Perhaps it is the intimacy, the small acts of care, the stitches in a stocking, the pouring of tea, the quiet reading of a story by the fire. Or perhaps it is the unity, the way all these lives, so different and yet so close, together wove the fabric of London. A fabric as intricate and enduring as any garment sewn in its workshops. And though the world has changed, though gas lamps have given way to electric lights and hansom cabs to motor cars, the heart of the city remains. People still wake, work, walk, rest. They still sip tea, read stories, sing songs. They still dream. The details shift, but the rhythm endures, timeless and soothing. So, dear listener, as our story closes, let us rest in the memory of all we have seen. Picture London's fog at dawn, its bustle at noon, its glow at dusk, its hush at night. Picture its people, millions of lives, each one carrying hope, sorrow, laughter, love. Let these images linger not as noise, but as calm, not as history alone, but as a lullaby for the present, now. As you drift further into sleep, let the city fade into quiet mist, its lamps glowing faintly in the distance. Let its footsteps soften, its songs hush, its voices fall still. Let the rhythm of its days carry you, slow and gentle, into your own dreams. For history, like sleep, is a journey, and tonight you have traveled far